Hello everyone, I am the Creeps Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I was about 12 or 13 years old, walking to my psychiatrist's office on a quiet, chilly evening. It wasn't a long walk, about 30 minutes, but it was dark, and I usually enjoyed walking when it was late. The streets were calm, almost too calm. The air had that stillness that I loved. No one was around, and the world felt peaceful in its own way. The night wasn't the kind that made you nervous. It was the kind that made you feel like you could just disappear into the world, and no one would notice. I didn't live in a bad neighborhood, or at least, not one that I ever felt was dangerous. But there's something unsettling about being alone at night, especially when you're still a kid. I didn't have that much of a problem with it though. Most of the time, I liked the solitude. But that night was different. I didn't know it yet, but something was about to happen that would make me never feel safe walking at night again. I was halfway to my psychiatrist's office when it first happened. A Cadillac came cruising down the street, slow and steady. I noticed it right away because it seemed out of place. The car was nice, but it wasn't a car I'd expect to see in this part of the neighborhood. It had tinted windows, the kind of car that looks like it belongs in some movie about tough guys and street gangs. Inside the car, I could see a bunch of people, maybe 4 or 5, hanging out of the windows, laughing and yelling. They were teenagers, or maybe early 20s, all with a cocky, almost predatory air about them. As they drove by me, they started jeering, calling things like, "Hey, kid," and "What's up, loser?" I wasn't sure if they were just trying to be funny, or if they were being serious, but I didn't care enough to respond. I kept walking, hoping they'd just keep going. A few minutes passed, and then the Cadillac was back, coming down the same street again. This time, the taunts were louder, more aggressive. They were making faces at me, some of them leaning out of the windows, clearly trying to get a reaction. My stomach twisted. They were circling the block. They weren't just passing by anymore, they were actively following me. I tried not to look at them, but I could feel their eyes on me. I could hear the mocking laughter in their voices. My heart rate picked up. I wasn't sure if they were just messing with me, or if there was something more to it. Either way, I didn't want to find out. So I did the first thing that came to mind. I ducked behind some bushes in front of a house. The bushes were thick and tall enough to hide me completely, and for a moment I felt safe. I waited, holding my breath, listening for the sound of the Cadillac. A few seconds passed, and the car came around the corner again. It slowed down but didn't stop. They must have assumed I'd gone inside one of the houses. The taunting stopped. I could hear their muffled voices from where I was hiding, but it was almost as if they lost interest. They drove away, turning the corner and disappearing down the street. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe they'd given up, and I could go about my business. But something in my gut told me I should wait just a little longer. I should have listened to that gut feeling. After a minute or so, I decided to leave the safety of the bushes. I should have just stayed there, hidden until I was sure they were gone. But I didn't. I stepped out from behind the bushes, trying to act normal, and continued walking toward my destination. My steps were quick, but not so quick that it looked like I was running. I didn't want to draw attention. Of course, it wasn't long before I heard the sound of the car coming again. My stomach dropped. I looked behind me, and sure enough, there it was, the Cadillac, rolling down the street again. This time, they saw me immediately. I tried to walk faster, but I knew there was no way I was going to outrun them. They were right behind me now, and they made sure I knew it. The taunting started again, louder this time, mixed with laughter. It felt like they were closing in on me, getting closer with every second. In a panic, I decided to duck behind some bushes again. This time, I wasn't going to make the same mistake. I ran to an apartment building and hid in a patch of bushes there, hoping that maybe the thugs in the car would pass me by again. But I wasn't in the clear yet. I had barely settled into my hiding spot when a man came out of the apartment building. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, dressed in a sleeveless undershirt, his muscles showing that he worked out. He looked at me with a puzzled expression. At first, I thought he was going to ask me to leave or something. But instead, he asked what I was doing hiding in his bushes. I told him quickly, my voice shaky. I explained that I was on my way to see my psychiatrist, and that I'd been followed by a bunch of teenagers in a car. I didn't know if he'd believe me, but I was terrified, and I guess he could see that. His face softened, and I could tell that he realized I wasn't just making up a story. Just then, the Cadillac pulled up to the curb right in front of us. I could feel my heart racing again. I didn't look at the car directly, but I could feel the eyes on me. They weren't laughing anymore, not with this guy standing next to me. But they didn't leave. They just parked there, staring at us, sizing up the situation. The guy standing next to me didn't flinch. He just looked at them, his expression hardening. He was calm, like he was used to dealing with trouble. One of the people in the car yelled something, but I couldn't make it out. I noticed that the car wasn't as full as it had been. It was missing a couple of the people who had been in it earlier. That's when I realized they'd changed their plan. They weren't just trying to mess with me anymore. They were trying to trap me. 3 of the people got out of the car, walking toward me from the opposite direction. They were moving fast, too fast for me to just walk away and make it to safety. Their plan was simple. They wanted to corner me, to grab me and drag me into the car. They didn't care how old I was. But with the man standing next to me, they hesitated. He didn't say anything to me, but I could see the tension in his posture. He was ready for whatever came next. The 3 thugs stopped about halfway to us. They looked at each other, sizing up the situation. Then slowly, they turned and walked back to the car. It was like they realized that they weren't going to get what they wanted with this guy standing there. The car revved its engine and turned around the block, heading back the way it had come. I was left standing there, still scared but safe for now. The man asked me if I wanted him to stay with me a little longer, or if I wanted to go inside his apartment until I was sure it was safe. I was torn. He was offering me safety, but I didn't want to be a bother, and I really didn't want to be late for my appointment. Plus, part of me thought I wouldn't see that car again. Maybe they'd given up. So, I thanked him and told him I'd be fine, that I just wanted to get on with my walk. He nodded and went back into his apartment, closing the door behind him. I watched the door close, and for a moment I felt unsure. Was I making the right choice? I still felt scared, but I forced myself to move on. I kept walking, trying to ignore the lingering fear in the back of my mind. I didn't see the Cadillac again. I made it to my psychiatrist's office without incident, my heart still racing from what had happened. I told my therapist about the whole thing, and he immediately insisted on calling the police. They came and took my report, but I never heard anything about it after that. On the way home, I didn't take the usual route. I deliberately went out of my way, taking side streets, hoping to avoid running into them again. I never saw that car or those people again. It was as if they had disappeared. But the whole experience stuck with me, a reminder of how quickly things could change, how quickly people could turn on you. I was lucky, really. If I hadn't hidden in those bushes, if that guy hadn't shown up when he did, who knows what would have happened. It's been years now, and I still think about that night sometimes. The world's not as safe as it seems, even in places you think you know well. But I learned something important that night. Sometimes it's okay to ask for help, and sometimes you'll find help when you least expect it. This is a story I'm sharing not because it's my own, but because it's just too good not to tell. You'll understand once you hear it. The guy at the center of this story is someone I know pretty well. He's a regular guy, just trying to get by and keep his family safe. Not too long ago, something happened to him that made him question everything he thought he knew about being prepared. The story starts off pretty normal, but trust me, you won't expect how it ends. It all started a few weeks ago. My friend, let's call him Mike, was just living his life in Florida. He had recently moved into a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood with his wife and their newborn daughter. Things were going well for them, until one night, a few break-ins started happening in the area. At first, Mike didn't think much of it. He figured it was just some random crime wave, nothing too serious. But then, the more it happened, the more it started to hit too close to home. Mike was a family man, a pretty responsible guy who liked to take care of his loved ones. When he saw the reports about break-ins, it didn't take long for him to decide he needed to take some extra precautions. He wasn't sure what to expect, but with a newborn at home, he wanted to be ready for anything. So, he made the decision to buy a gun. Not for any reason other than the need to protect his family if things ever went sideways. He took a gun safety class, got the permit, and bought a gun. A few weeks went by and things seemed to settle down. The break-ins didn't seem to be happening as often, and Mike started to feel a little more at ease. He went back to his regular routine: work, home, time with the family. He'd even started to forget about the whole thing until one Friday night. It was a typical evening. Mike had just gotten home from work and was looking forward to a relaxing night in. He decided to grab some Chinese takeout for dinner, just something quick and easy. He wasn't feeling like cooking, and the thought of sitting down to a warm meal without the hassle was comforting. So, he left the house around 7 p.m., heading to his usual Chinese food spot down the street. The drive was short, just a few minutes away. Mike didn't think anything of it at first, but as he was pulling out of the driveway, he noticed a car behind him. Now, Florida drivers are known for being, well, not the best, so at first, Mike thought nothing of it. It was probably just some random person heading the same way. He didn't think the car was following him, not at first. But as he made a couple of turns, he noticed that the car was still right behind him. It wasn't just trailing him, though. The car seemed to be matching his pace, taking the same turns he did. Now, Mike wasn't the type to overreact. He thought maybe it was just a coincidence. But as he turned onto a quieter street, he started to feel uneasy. The car behind him was still there, and now it was honking. Mike's heart started to race. It wasn't just honking once, it was laying on the horn repeatedly, flashing its headlights. It was almost as if they were trying to get his attention or pressure him into doing something. Mike tried to stay calm, thinking maybe the person behind him was just an impatient driver. But then, they followed him as he sped up. The car was still there, tailing him close, no matter how fast he went. Mike's anxiety skyrocketed. He could feel his palms starting to sweat on the steering wheel. He didn't want to panic, but the flashing lights and constant honking were making it harder to keep a level head. He started speeding, weaving through traffic, trying to shake off whoever was behind him. But every time he thought he'd lost them, the car was still there, a few feet behind. At this point, Mike wasn't just worried about the situation anymore. He was terrified. His mind was racing, running through every possibility. What if this wasn't just a crazy driver? What if this person had bad intentions? He had his wife and baby girl at home. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. He had to protect them, no matter what. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he didn't hesitate. He slammed on the brakes, threw the car into park, and darted out of the car. The car behind him had stopped a few feet away, and Mike didn't give it a second thought. He rushed inside, locking the door behind him. His heart was pounding as he ran into the house, checking every room. His wife was in the living room, holding their daughter, looking confused by his frantic entrance. "Mike, what's going on?" she asked. "Get in the bathroom now," Mike told her, his voice shaking. "Stay there, lock the door, and don't come out. I'll explain later." She didn't argue. She grabbed their daughter and rushed into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Mike didn't waste another second. He ran to the bedroom, opened the drawer under the bed, and pulled out the gun. He checked the safety and held it firmly in his hands. Mike wasn't a violent guy. He didn't like the idea of using a weapon, but he knew that if someone had followed him all the way home, there was a chance things were about to escalate. He couldn't take any chances. He moved quietly through the house, checking the windows, making sure everything was locked. When he reached the front door, he crouched down and listened. For a moment, everything was quiet. Too quiet. And then he heard it. Footsteps, slowly moving across the front lawn. Mike's heart skipped a beat. His first thought was that it was the person who had been following him. He didn't know who it was or what they wanted, but he wasn't about to find out. He stepped back into the shadows, holding his breath, waiting for whatever was about to happen. A knock. One, then two, loud enough to make Mike jump. "Get off my property," Mike shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "I have a gun. I called the police. Get away from my house." He raised the gun, pointing it toward the door, ready for whatever came next. But then, something happened that Mike didn't expect. The voice from outside wasn't threatening or malicious. It was small, almost timid, like a person who was caught off guard. "Sir," the voice said. "Sir, you forgot your fried rice." Mike froze. His mind was racing, trying to process what he had just heard. He peered through the peephole, half expecting someone to be standing there with a weapon or some other dangerous intent. But when he looked, he saw nothing. No one was there, just a delivery bag on the ground. A moment passed, and then another knock. "Sir, your fried rice." Mike stood there, frozen in place. The panic he had been feeling just moments before seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a feeling of complete disbelief. He slowly lowered the gun, still trying to wrap his mind around what was happening. That was when he heard it again. "Sir, your fried rice." Mike realized, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that the entire thing, the car tailing him, the honking, the flashing headlights, had been nothing more than a mistake. The delivery driver had been trying to catch up with him after he left the restaurant, thinking Mike had forgotten his order. The honking and flashing had been an attempt to get his attention, and Mike had completely misinterpreted the situation as something dangerous. He quickly opened the door, still shaken, and saw the delivery driver standing there with the bag of food in his hand, looking just as confused as Mike felt. "I'm sorry, sir," the delivery driver said, "but you forgot your fried rice." Mike's legs felt weak beneath him, and he almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. He wasn't sure if he was relieved or embarrassed. Maybe a little bit of both. He took the bag of food, thanked the delivery driver, and closed the door behind him. The whole situation had escalated so quickly, and yet it had been nothing. Just a misunderstanding. He walked back to the bathroom, where his wife and daughter were still hiding. When he opened the door, they looked at him with wide eyes. "What happened?" his wife asked, still confused. Mike sat down on the bed, holding his head in his hands. He felt a little like a fool. He wasn't sure if he should laugh or cry. I thought someone was breaking in, but it was the guy from the Chinese place," Mike muttered, still trying to process everything. His wife stared at him, her face a mix of relief and disbelief. "Are you serious?" she asked. Mike just nodded, too exhausted to explain further. He sat there for a long time, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. The fear, the tension, the adrenaline, it was all so much, but in the end, it had been nothing. The rest of the night passed in silence. The tension slowly faded, but Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just learned a very important lesson. Sometimes, the scariest situations are the ones we build up in our heads. What seemed like a life-or-death moment had turned out to be nothing more than a case of bad timing and misunderstanding. But hey, at least he got his fried rice. It was the kind of day that didn't seem like it was supposed to be. The sky was thick with clouds, the kind that feels like the whole world is on the verge of something, but never quite delivers. It made the air feel heavy, and the world was wrapped in this strange, oppressive dimness. I was about 13 years old, just old enough to have my own independence, but still young enough to feel uneasy when things didn't feel right. It was one of those days where nothing felt quite normal, even though I didn't have the words for it back then. I had been visiting my grandmother's house, or as I called her, Nana's house, which was just on the edge of a small rural town. Her house was old, surrounded by acres of woods, and it sat on the outskirts where the forest started to creep in. A small, quiet neighborhood surrounded us, with only a handful of houses and even fewer kids. It was peaceful in a way that made it easy to forget how isolated it was. Nana always said the world had been a lot bigger when she was a kid, but it felt small when I was there. I didn't mind it, though, because there was something comfortable about the way the world slowed down at her place. That day, Nana had asked me to walk back home from the grocery store for her. It wasn't far, but the path I usually took cut through a small patch of pine trees. There was a narrow, worn trail that led back to the house through the trees. It wasn't a bad walk, but it was the kind of place where the light got dim under the trees, especially when the sky was overcast like that. I was used to it. The shadows stretched long and thick over the ground, but I didn't feel scared. At least not at first. As I walked along, the ground was soft beneath my feet, and I had to be careful not to trip on the roots or the occasional stone. The trail was mostly quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves or the sound of the wind moving through the branches. But the air had a weight to it, the kind that sits heavy on your chest. You know the feeling when the weather feels like it's about to break, but it doesn't? That was what it felt like. The pressure building in the air. The pines were tall, their branches swaying slowly above, blocking much of the light. The smell of pine and earth mixed in the air, and it almost felt like I could smell the dampness in the air, as if the earth was holding its breath. As I walked deeper into the trees, I noticed something odd. There, ahead of me, just up ahead on the right, I saw a small figure sitting under one of the trees. At first, I thought it might have been one of the other kids from the neighborhood. There were only a few kids that lived around the area, and I knew most of them. But as I got closer, I realized I didn't recognize the kid sitting there. He wasn't wearing the usual clothes most of the kids around here wore. No baseball cap or sneakers, no brightly colored shirts. Instead, he was dressed in something that looked like old, ragged clothes. It looked like a burlap or woolen pair of pants, long and dirty, as if they had been worn for far too long. His shirt was equally worn and torn, grayish in color, with stains all over it. It didn't look like something a kid would wear around here. It looked old, too old for anyone my age. As I walked closer, my heart started to race a little. The kid's head was down, his hair matted and dirty. He didn't seem to notice me at first, so I decided to keep walking up to him. I was curious, and maybe a little cautious too. I didn't know why, but something about this whole situation felt a little off. There was a strange stillness in the air, and for a moment, the world around me seemed to quiet down even more. When I was just a few feet away, I could see what he was doing. He had two little metal wagons or cars, something like that, and was pushing them around in the dirt. He didn't seem to be playing, not in the way a normal kid would. It was more like he was just moving them back and forth slowly, his hands almost shaking as they pushed the tiny objects around in the dirt. He didn't look up or acknowledge me, and that made my skin crawl just a little. "Hey," I started, my voice breaking through the quiet. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe just to see a kid that I could talk to. Maybe I just wanted the reassurance that everything was fine. What are you doing?" I stuttered, taking another cautious step closer. I didn't really know what to say, but my words seemed to hang in the air longer than usual. For some reason, I didn't feel like I could say more. And then, without warning, everything shifted. The kid's head snapped up, and for a moment, I saw his face. His eyes were dark, too dark, like they hadn't seen the light in a long time. His skin was pale, almost ashen, and his expression was vacant. It was the kind of look that made my stomach flip, the kind of look you see in old photos of people who've seen too much. But it wasn't the look itself that got to me. It was the feeling that flooded me all at once. A cold, sickening dread spread through my chest like ice. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something deeper, something instinctual, like my body recognized that something was wrong on a level I couldn't explain. My throat tightened, and I felt like I might throw up. Every hair on my body stood up, and my legs felt heavier, like I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, oppressive. I froze. Without even thinking, I took a small step back. It was the kind of moment where you don't understand why you're backing up, but your body does it anyway. And then, in an instant, the kid moved. He grabbed both of his little wagons in one quick motion and jumped to his feet. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like he was being pulled by some invisible force. In one swift motion, he circled around the back of the tree, disappearing from my sight. It happened so fast, I couldn't even register it fully. 1 second, he was there, and the next, he was gone. Just like that. The air was still again. The dread, the nausea, it was all gone just like that. As quickly as it had come, it vanished, and I felt like I could breathe again. But the unease lingered. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to see where he went. I had to make sure I wasn't imagining things, that I wasn't just freaking myself out. I took a few hesitant steps forward, closer to the tree where he had disappeared. The ground under my feet felt heavy, and I could feel the dirt beneath me shift slightly with each step. As I rounded the tree, I saw nothing. The spot where he had been sitting was empty, the dirt undisturbed. No sign of the boy, no sign of the wagons, nothing at all. It was like he had never been there. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. I looked around the area, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But the more I looked, the more everything seemed like it was back to normal. The trees were still tall and silent, the ground still damp with the humidity of the air. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I couldn't shake the image of that boy's eyes, the emptiness in them, and the way he moved, like he wasn't fully human. I walked the rest of the way back to Nana's house quickly, not daring to look back. By the time I got home, the clouds had started to break a little, and the sun was beginning to filter through the trees, but the feeling didn't leave me. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened that day. Maybe I thought they wouldn't believe me, or maybe I just didn't want to talk about it. But it stayed with me, that cold feeling, that sense of something just not being right. I don't know who that boy was, or what he was doing in those woods that day. Maybe I'll never know. But every time I walk through those pines now, I can still feel the weight of that moment, that feeling of being watched, of being somewhere I shouldn't have been. The woods are quiet again when I walk through them, but every so often, I think I hear something. A rustling in the trees, a faint sound in the distance, something that feels like it's waiting. I don't walk through there alone anymore. Something about that day still lingers, and I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to see what I saw. When I was a kid, I didn't have a lot of supervision. My mom worked days, and my dad worked nights. This meant I had a lot of free time during the day, and often, it felt like I had the whole house to myself. My dad would usually be asleep in his room after his shift ended, and my mom wouldn't be home until late in the afternoon. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet, and while I wasn't exactly lonely, I often found myself bored. The silence pressed in on me, and it felt like there was no one around to talk to. Most days, I spent my time sitting in front of the TV, watching cartoons, or playing with whatever toys I had lying around. I'd imagine elaborate worlds for the characters, building entire stories in my head. But after a while, even that became uninteresting. When I got bored, I'd retreat to my room. It was a small, unremarkable room with a bed in the corner and a worn-out carpet that always felt a little too cold under my feet. On the nightstand next to my bed, there was an old home phone, the kind with a cord that wound in loops when you weren't careful. It wasn't a fancy phone, but for some reason, it always caught my attention. I started to pick up the phone, my small fingers fumbling with the buttons, pressing them just to see what would happen. Sometimes I'd just dial random numbers, curious to see if anyone would answer. Most of the time, it was nothing, a quick buzz or the sound of a busy line. But every now and then, someone picked up. I would always get nervous, not sure what to say, but I'd ask questions anyway, just for the fun of it. Some people would hang up immediately, irritated by the strange call. Others would warn me to never call strangers. I didn't care much, though. It was something to do. But one afternoon, I pressed the numbers without thinking too much. I didn't even pay attention to what I was doing, just mindlessly pushing buttons while I stared at the wall. Then, a voice came through the speaker. It wasn't harsh, but soft, deep, and calm. I froze for a second, unsure of what to do. The voice said, "Hello." I wasn't sure how to respond, but I asked anyway, "Who's this?" The man on the other end didn't seem bothered by the question. He responded slowly, as if he were trying to decide whether or not to be friendly. "I'm Santa," he said. I didn't believe it for a second, but I was young and naive, and the idea of Santa Claus answering a phone call made me excited. The possibility of actually talking to him made my heart race. It didn't even cross my mind that something might be wrong. I was so thrilled I didn't think to question it. For the next 10 or 15 minutes, I fired off questions. I wanted to know everything. How he delivered presents, what the elves were like, what the North Pole looked like. I asked him about his reindeer, about his sleigh, about how he knew who had been good and bad. I was so caught up in the excitement that I didn't even stop to breathe. The man answered every question patiently, almost like he had all the time in the world. It felt like I was part of something special. But then, something shifted. His voice became a little more serious. "Well," he said after a pause, "there's a problem." I didn't know what he meant. I was too young to think anything was wrong. I waited for him to explain. "One of the elves misplaced your address," he continued. "We don't know where you live. If I don't get your address, you won't get any presents on Christmas." I was taken aback. The excitement drained from my body, replaced by a growing sense of panic. My mind raced. I couldn't remember our address. I knew the name of the street, but the numbers? The house number? They eluded me. I felt my throat tighten, my heart starting to pound in my chest. "No," I whispered to myself, trying to hold back tears. "No, no, no." I scrambled to remember the numbers, but nothing came to me. I couldn't focus. I was only a child, and the weight of it felt too big to handle. The fear crept in, overwhelming me. What if I didn't get presents? What if Santa forgot about me? I thought of all the toys I had hoped for, all the things I had dreamed of getting. My stomach twisted into knots as I fought to recall the address. I ran into my parents' bedroom, shaking with panic. My dad was asleep, snoring softly, his face half buried in the pillow. I shook him awake, desperate. "Dad!" I cried out, louder than I intended. "Santa needs our address." My dad blinked at me, groggy and confused. He didn't seem to understand what was going on, but I was beyond explaining. I thrust the phone at him, unable to process the situation anymore. His eyes narrowed with annoyance as he grabbed the phone from my hands, demanding to know who was calling at this hour. But when he tried to speak to the man on the other end, there was only silence. The line had gone dead. My dad's frustration was palpable as he yelled at me to stay away from the phone. I didn't argue. I was too shaken to say anything. The moment had passed, but the fear remained. My parents were angry, but I didn't care. All I could think about was the man on the other end of the line. The voice that told me I wouldn't get presents unless I gave him information. I don't remember much else from that day. Only that after that, I was never allowed near the phone again. The conversation faded into the back of my mind, buried under the weight of everyday life. But the memory of it lingered. Even as I got older, I would sometimes think about that strange phone call. I've often wondered who the man was. He didn't sound like a prank caller. His voice was too calm, too sure of itself. Maybe he was just some lonely guy looking to mess with a kid. Maybe he had been doing it for years. But there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. Over the years, I tried to forget it. I pushed the memory aside, buried it under a blanket of other childhood experiences. But every now and then, when I pick up a phone, I think back to that day. I remember the desperation I felt, the panic, the way my heart had pounded in my chest as I tried to remember our address. And I realized just how vulnerable I was. I never called random numbers again, and I never trusted anything that came from a voice on the other end of the line. As I grew older, I learned that there are people out there who exploit the innocence of kids, who take advantage of their curiosity and gullibility. I understand now that what happened wasn't just a harmless prank. It was a calculated manipulation, preying on a child's natural desire for attention, for reassurance, and for a connection to something as magical as Santa. To this day, the memory still creeps me out. I'll never know who that man was or why he targeted me, but the feeling of fear that I had that day, of being manipulated, of being pushed into a corner by someone I couldn't even see, stays with me. I realize now that what happened was more than just a confusing phone call. It was a reminder of how easy it is for someone to take advantage of a child's trust. It makes me wonder how many other kids he called, how many others were just as unaware as I was, and how many of them were never told to stay away from the phone. The fear still lingers, and I've never forgotten the lesson it taught me. There are people out there who don't have your best interests at heart, and sometimes the scariest thing isn't the danger you can see, but the one you can't. I was just a kid when it happened, and thinking back on it now, the details seem almost too clear to be a coincidence. I was about 8 years old, maybe 9, and everything felt a lot simpler back then. I didn't really understand what it meant when someone passed away, but my great-grandmother's death still made me feel strange, like a shift in the air around me, like something important was missing, but I couldn't quite grasp what that was. We weren't very close. She lived with my grandparents, and I would only visit a few times a year. I remember her smile, though. Every time I went over there, I'd walk into the living room, and she'd be sitting in her armchair, wrinkled hands resting on her lap, always looking at me with that little smile and giving me a thumbs up. It was just a gesture, something small and simple, but it made me feel like she saw me, like she approved of me even if we didn't talk much. Maybe it was silly, but I liked it. I liked that she would smile and give me that thumbs up, and I would giggle and smile back, even if I didn't understand why it made me feel so good. The day it happened, I was thinking about her for some reason. I had just finished school and was walking home when my mind drifted to her, as it sometimes did after she passed away. The memory of her smile and that odd thumbs up filled my head. I could see her sitting in that chair, her eyes twinkling as she gave me that little gesture, her slow movements somehow still graceful despite her age. I don't know why, but it was a memory that kept returning to me, like my mind couldn't let go of it. When I got home, I rushed to the basement, something I usually did after school. It wasn't the most glamorous place in the house, but it was quiet and secluded, and I liked to spend time there, reading or playing with old toys I found. I darted through the hallway and was halfway down the stairs when I lost my footing. It all happened so fast, but the next thing I knew, I was tumbling down the last few steps. Now the basement stairs were steep, and the gap between the bottom of the steps and the basement gate was only about 4 feet. The ceiling was low, maybe 7 feet high, so when taller people walked down those stairs, they had to duck to avoid banging their heads. The gate at the bottom was another thing that could trip you up if you weren't careful. I remember that feeling of falling, like everything was happening in slow motion. My feet hit the stairs, and I lost my balance completely. The feeling of the air around me and the cold concrete floor rushing up to meet me was all I could focus on. But what happened next was strange. I didn't crash into the gate. I didn't hit the floor the way I thought I would. Instead, I landed softly, almost like someone had caught me just before I could hurt myself. I don't know why, but it felt like the world had slowed down just for a moment, just long enough for me to stop myself from getting hurt. My first thought after the shock of falling was of my great-grandmother. It wasn't something I expected, but the image of her, smiling at me and giving me that thumbs up, popped into my head instantly. It was like she had somehow been there in that moment, watching over me. I didn't know what to think of it then. I was too young to really process it, but I remember feeling comforted by it. I felt safe, like maybe it wasn't such a big deal that I had tripped, because somehow I had been protected. I stood there for a moment, confused, trying to figure out what had just happened. I looked up at the gate, which was still in place, and then at the ceiling, which was low enough that anyone taller than me had to duck to avoid hitting their head. But somehow I had fallen, and instead of hitting anything, I landed like I was placed there gently. I didn't understand it, but in that moment, the only thing that felt real was that memory of my grandma smiling and giving me that thumbs up. I shrugged it off, not thinking too much about it at the time. After all, I was young, and kids have wild imaginations. Maybe I had just dreamed it. Maybe I had just imagined that landing as something more magical than it was. Who knows? But as the days went on, I couldn't shake that feeling. That feeling that somehow something had watched over me in that moment. Years passed, and I grew up like kids do. I left the house where I had tripped down the stairs and moved into a different part of my life. My family and I had moved a few times, and the house where my great-grandmother had lived was sold. Still, that memory stayed with me, clear and vivid, like a snapshot in my mind that wouldn't fade. I didn't think much of it, though. I didn't talk about it to anyone, because it seemed like such a silly thing to bring up. I never told anyone about how, when I tripped, I had somehow landed without injury, like someone had caught me in midair, or how the first thing I thought of afterward was my grandma and her thumbs up. But even as an adult, the memory doesn't go away. Every now and then, when I'm alone or when I'm thinking about things from the past, I'll remember that moment. I'll remember falling down the stairs and landing softly, and then that instant thought of my great-grandmother. I don't know why, but that moment sticks with me. It always has. It's strange because as I grew older, I realized it wasn't just about the fall. It was about how that memory made me feel, how that connection with her, even in a moment of clumsiness and confusion, gave me a strange kind of peace. Even though I wasn't close with her, even though she had passed away, in that one moment, it felt like she was still there. Not in any supernatural way, not as a ghost or anything like that, but as a part of me, like a memory that became something more than just a thought. And even though I could never explain how I landed so gently after tripping, or why my mind connected it to that moment with my grandma, I've never forgotten it. Every time I think about it, I'm reminded of the way her thumbs up made me feel as a kid, and how that small gesture, something so simple, made me feel seen, safe, and loved. Even if I didn't fully understand it back then, I know now that it was something I needed. Maybe I just needed that reassurance, even if it was just in my mind. And maybe, just maybe, it was that same reassurance that kept me from getting hurt, even if it wasn't in any way I could logically explain. Maybe it was just a moment of grace, a moment when everything lined up just right. Or maybe it was just a memory that stuck with me, something simple and beautiful in a way that only a child could understand. Either way, I'll never forget it. The building where my friends and I lived was old, really old. It was one of those buildings you find in Chicago, where every brick and beam feels like it's holding 100 years of stories. My buddy Manny's parents owned it, and when I was 16, they let us have an apartment on the top floor. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, and that was all that mattered. The building itself was kind of a maze. You could wander through the hallways and get lost if you weren't careful. There were rumors about the place, whispers of tunnels running underneath, ones that supposedly had something to do with Al Capone and the old mob. Manny's dad had told us that the tunnels were sealed off, but you could still feel the weight of their history lingering in the air. We used to hang out on the roof. It wasn't much, just an old, flat roof with cracked tiles and a railing that looked like it could give way at any moment. But it was quiet up there, the kind of quiet you can't find anywhere else in the city. We'd go up there to smoke cigarettes, not caring about the world below. Getting to the roof was a bit of a trek, though. You had to go through the attic to get there, and the attic was dark. No lights, just a bunch of old junk and creaky floorboards. The only light we had was from our phones, those old Motorola flip phones with their dim, yellowish screens. We weren't exactly trying to do anything heroic. We just wanted a place to hang out without the hassle. One afternoon, Manny and I decided to go up. It was one of those days where you just want to get away from everything. I had to take a piss, so I told Manny I'd meet him up there after I went to the bathroom. I was in no rush. I wasn't expecting anything weird to happen. I washed my hands, took my time, and then headed upstairs. The air in the building was thick, and the stairs creaked under my weight as I made my way up. As I reached the attic door, I felt it. It was a weird sensation, like I wasn't alone. It wasn't anything specific, just a feeling that something was off. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was up there with me. I didn't think too much about it. Manny and I liked to mess with each other. Scaring each other was part of the fun. So, I figured he was just playing some prank, trying to sneak around and jump out at me. I called out, "Manny, I know it's you. Quit fucking around." I took a few steps further into the attic, trying to follow the shadow I thought I'd seen. There was just enough light from my phone to make out vague shapes in the darkness. I followed what I thought was Manny's figure, my phone light shaking in my hand as I moved. The shadow seemed to be moving just out of reach, dodging behind some old crates and furniture. I stepped closer, my heart starting to race, but I thought it was just part of the joke. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, light and quick, moving ahead of me, just out of my reach. "Manny!" I yelled, my voice echoing off the walls. "Stop playing, I know it's you." But instead of a response from my friend, I heard something else. It wasn't Manny's voice. It was a deep, distant sound that didn't quite fit. And that's when I realized how quiet everything had become. The kind of quiet where you can hear the blood pumping in your ears. Then, from downstairs, I heard Manny's voice, clear as day. "What?" he said. It wasn't a shout or a call. It was just a simple, confused what. My stomach dropped. I froze. The shadow, the one I'd been chasing, was still ahead of me, pinned against the far corner of the attic. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my body frozen in place. I turned around quickly, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I had to get out of there. I didn't even think, I just ran. I bolted down the stairs, my legs almost giving out as I descended as quickly as I could. I was gasping for air when I finally made it to the apartment. Manny was still there, sitting on the couch, talking to his girlfriend. I could barely catch my breath as I stumbled into the room. "Manny, were you up there?" I asked, my voice shaky. He looked at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I thought I saw you up there," I said, trying to explain, but the words were getting caught in my throat. "I saw something in the attic. I followed it, and then you called out from downstairs. I thought it was you up there." Manny didn't seem scared. He just shrugged and kept talking to his girlfriend, but I could tell he was a little weirded out by my reaction. I didn't care. I didn't want to go back up there. I didn't even want to look at that stupid attic door again. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about what had happened. The way the shadow had moved, the way it had felt like someone was there, but when I turned around, no one was. I kept telling myself that I had just been seeing things, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew what I saw. There was something else up there with me. I wasn't the only one who had that feeling either. A few weeks later, I was talking to Manny and some of our other friends, and one of them mentioned something strange. He was up on the roof the night before, and he'd seen something similar. A shadow that didn't make sense, a movement that didn't belong. He thought he was just tired or imagining things, but after hearing what I had experienced, he wasn't so sure anymore. We tried to rationalize it. We told ourselves the old building was just creaky, that the shadows were caused by the dim light from our phones. But that didn't explain the feeling of someone being there when no one was, or the way the shadow moved, like it was trying to lead me somewhere. I knew what I saw, and I knew I wasn't the only one who had felt it. We never went up to the attic again after that night. We still went up to the roof, but we'd always take the long way around. We didn't talk about it much, but it hung there, in the air, between us. The old building had its secrets, and whatever was in the attic was one of them. The thing is, no one ever tried to convince me that I was imagining it. They didn't have to. We all knew that some things can't be explained. Some things just are. Years later, I still don't know what it was I saw up there. Maybe it was just the dim light and the weird way the shadows played tricks on my eyes. Maybe it was something else, something that was there long before we ever moved in. But whatever it was, I knew it wasn't just in my head. I can't explain it, and I don't want to try. I just know what I saw, and I know I wasn't the only one who saw it. I was about 23 years ago when this happened back in Haiti. My cousins and I were out in the countryside late at night, well past the time when most people should be in bed. The air was thick and humid, and the only sounds that could be heard were the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of crickets. The moon was nowhere to be found, and the only light came from a few scattered stars in the sky. Haiti is a mountainous country, and the terrain is rocky, uneven, and steep. The path was barely visible in the darkness, but that didn't stop us from running around, laughing, and making a lot of noise. We were playing a game of hide and seek, but instead of hiding behind trees or in houses like usual, we'd run up and down the hills. I don't know what we were thinking, but the adrenaline was high. As kids, we loved to push the limits, especially at night when everything felt more alive. The area we were in was remote, no streetlights, no houses close by, just mountains, rocks, and a sense of isolation. At some point, I stopped for a moment to catch my breath, leaning against one of the boulders that seemed to pop up everywhere in Haiti's mountainous terrain. My cousins had scattered to different hiding spots, and I was left standing in the dark, surrounded by the sharp edges of the rocks and the thick, humid air that made every breath feel heavy. The quiet was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the occasional crunch of dirt underfoot. That's when I saw him. Out of nowhere, an old man appeared, standing at the edge of the rocky hillside. He didn't walk up or make any sound before appearing, like he just materialized out of the darkness. His presence was unsettling, and I immediately felt a chill run down my spine, even though the air was warm. The old man's face was gaunt, with deep lines carved into his skin. His clothes were old, tattered, and didn't fit him well, as if they were just thrown together. But what stood out the most were his legs. They were huge, muscular, and bent at odd angles, like the legs of a horse. He looked at us, and I froze, unsure of what to do. My cousins were just ahead of me, still lost in the game, and had yet to notice the old man. But I couldn't look away. There was something deeply wrong about him. Then the old man spoke, his voice rough and strained. "Hey boys, you know where I can get some horseshoes?" We looked at each other in confusion, not understanding what he meant. I glanced back at the man, trying to make sense of it, but all I could focus on were his strange, twisted legs. He didn't look normal. He didn't sound normal. "My feet hurt," he muttered, as if he were in some kind of pain. He stepped forward, and that's when it happened. He made the strangest sound I've ever heard, a low, neighing noise like a horse, but deeper, more guttural, like something that didn't belong to a human. The moment he did that, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My heart raced, and a deep, primal fear settled in my chest. I don't know what it was, but my instincts told me that this wasn't just some old man asking for help. There was something terrifying about him, something unnatural. My cousins had noticed him by now, and they too stood frozen, eyes wide, not knowing how to react. I didn't wait for anyone else. I turned and ran as fast as I could, the sound of my feet pounding against the ground echoing in my ears. My cousins followed right behind, shouting for me to slow down, but I couldn't stop. We ran until we reached the edge of the hill, where the rough path led us back to the house. We didn't stop to look back. We just kept running, breathless, adrenaline pumping through our veins. We didn't even speak as we reached the safety of the house, slamming the door behind us. We huddled in the corner, hearts racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was that man's face, twisted and unnatural, with those horse-like legs. I never saw him again, but I often wonder if he was real, or if it was something my mind had conjured up in the darkness. But that wasn't the only frightening thing that happened in Haiti. A few weeks later, tragedy struck. One of my cousins fell suddenly ill. It was a quick and brutal illness, and within days he was gone. The whole family was shaken, but we did what we had to do. It's customary in Haiti for the immediate family to stay at the house of the deceased after the funeral, and so we found ourselves all gathered at my uncle's place, mourning and remembering our cousin. That night, after the burial, we sat around, the house heavy with silence. The lights were dim, and the air had cooled slightly, but it still felt thick, oppressive. It was so quiet that every little sound seemed amplified. We were all trying to process what had happened, but the heaviness in the room made it impossible to focus. Then it came. A loud bang echoed through the door, followed by frantic knocking. "Mom, let me in. Help, help." I froze. The voice, my cousin's voice, was unmistakable. But how could that be? He had just been buried hours ago. Panic set in as we heard the sound of someone on the other side of the door, banging and pleading for help. My aunt, his mother, rushed to the door, but something about the way she hesitated made the air grow even thicker. She didn't open it. Instead, she stood there, her hand on the knob, trembling. Then we heard it. Other men, voices muffled but unmistakably aggressive, shouting as they pulled him away, beating him, dragging him off. My uncle's face went white. "No," he muttered under his breath. "No, not this." In that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong. I didn't understand it at first, but the look on my uncle's face told me everything I needed to know. In Haiti, there's a fear that few people speak about openly. The fear of being poisoned to the point of seeming dead, only to be buried alive, and then dug up to be used as a slave. It's a nightmare that haunts the rural areas, a deep, dark practice rooted in superstition, but also in the harsh realities of poverty and desperation. The men who came for my cousin weren't there to grieve. They were there to take him, alive, but not for long, turning him into something they could control, something they could use for their own purposes. People would do anything for power, for control, even if it meant destroying a life in the process. My aunt screamed, but my uncle held her back, his face pale with terror. He knew what was happening, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. We couldn't let them take him. We couldn't let them do this to us. But we were powerless. If we tried to resist, if we fought back, we would all be dead. They would kill us without hesitation. As quickly as it had started, the banging stopped. The night was silent again, and the fear hung in the air like smoke. We didn't move, too afraid to make a sound. We stayed there, frozen, waiting for what felt like hours, until we were sure the danger had passed. Eventually, my uncle whispered that we could leave. We gathered our things in silence, the weight of what had just happened too much to bear. We couldn't talk about it, couldn't make sense of it. The night had stretched on longer than we could have imagined, and the memories of what we had heard and seen would stay with us forever. I never went back to that house. The fear, the confusion, and the terror of that night lingered, a constant reminder of how fragile life is in some parts of the world. The truth is, we never found out what happened to my cousin, whether he had truly died or if he had been taken. The fear of what might happen to us kept us away from Haiti for good. That night, I learned a harsh lesson. In some places, reality is far scarier than any ghost story could ever be. A few years ago, I had a routine with my husband working the night shift. He worked about a 45-minute drive away, so he typically didn't get home until around 6 a.m. The quiet hours after he left were always a little unnerving for me. I'd try to make the best of it, getting the kids ready for bed, settling down with a movie, or reading a book. I wasn't terrified of being alone at night, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't always feel just a little uneasy when the house was completely still, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the wind rattling the windows. One night, it was already late, about 10 p.m. I decided to let my two kids, Emily and Ben, stay up a little longer than usual. They were already in their pajamas and seemed settled in for a cozy evening. I figured they'd fall asleep in my bed, so I let them watch a movie on the laptop. The plan was to let them enjoy some quiet time and then drift off to sleep while I finished up a few things. I went through the usual evening routine, locking up the house, making sure the doors were secure, and making sure all the windows were closed tight. The night felt like any other, calm and quiet. I left the dining room light on for my husband. It was something I always did, so he could find his way in when he came home from work. I closed my bedroom door just enough to block out the light, but leave a small crack, just enough to see the faint glow from under the door. The kids were huddled up on the bed, absorbed in their movie, and I settled into my side of the bed, scrolling through my phone. I figured that within an hour, they'd both be asleep, and I could finally relax. That's when I first heard it. The soft, slow footsteps. At first, I thought it was nothing. The house was old, and the hardwood floors creaked a lot. I assumed it was just the house settling. But then I heard it again. This time, the sound of someone walking across the dining room floor. My room was just off the dining room, so it was easy to hear footsteps, especially when the house was so still at night. The soft shuffle of feet on the wood was unmistakable. I glanced at the kids, who were still wide awake, eyes fixed on the laptop screen. It was too early for them to be asleep, and they didn't seem to have noticed the sound. I figured my husband was home early from work, maybe trying to sneak in quietly. It wasn't unusual for him to come home early now and then. I kept my door cracked open just enough to let the light shine through. The sound of the footsteps continued, back and forth, across the dining room floor. The faint glow of the dining room light was still visible under the crack of the door. I waited. I waited some more. 5 minutes passed, and there was still no sign of my husband. The footsteps continued, slow and steady. Something about it felt off. My heart started to race. Why hadn't he come into the room yet? Why was he just walking back and forth like that? I turned to the kids and told them to stay put, my voice shaky but trying to stay calm. I reached over to the laptop, pausing the movie. As soon as I opened the door, the footsteps stopped. It was as if they'd never been there at all. My heart thudded louder in my chest as I peered out into the dining room. There was no one. The light was still on, and the house was eerily quiet now. No movement, no sounds, just silence. I stepped out of the bedroom, cautiously walking toward the dining room. Every floorboard creaked beneath my feet as I moved down the hallway, my eyes scanning every corner. I looked into the living room. Nothing. I walked down the hallway toward the front door, making sure it was locked. I checked the windows, all of them securely latched. I walked to the back door and checked that too. Still locked. Everything was just as I had left it. I went into the kitchen, thinking I was probably just imagining things. Maybe I'd heard something from outside. I turned to the back porch, and that's when I saw him, my cat, Mr. Whiskers. He was sitting outside on the porch, staring at me through the glass door. He meowed softly, like he always did when he wanted to be let in. I blinked, taken aback. My cat was outside, but the sound of footsteps I had heard came from inside. There was no way he could have been the one walking through the dining room. I stood there frozen for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. My heart was still pounding. I let out a nervous laugh, trying to calm myself. I'd just been freaking out over nothing. Maybe the wind had made a noise or something. I reached for the door handle to let Mr. Whiskers in, but just as my hand touched it, my phone rang. It was my husband. I picked up the phone, relief washing over me at the sound of his familiar voice. But what he said next made my stomach drop. "Hey, make sure you lock up everything. There was a break-in a couple streets over earlier today," he said, his voice tense. "Just be extra careful." I froze. I couldn't breathe. My eyes went wide, my hands trembling as I clutched the phone. I could barely form words. He didn't know what had just happened. The footsteps, the eerie silence, and the sudden terror I felt. The fear crept over me in waves, and the reality of the situation hit me harder than I expected. "Okay," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I will." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. The footsteps I had heard. Had someone been in the house? Had someone been walking through the dining room, just out of view? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The fear clung to me like a second skin. I paced the house again, double-checking every door, every window. Everything was locked. Nothing had been disturbed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The night dragged on, and I did my best to settle down. I sat in the living room, the lights on, and tried to distract myself by watching TV with the kids. But every noise made me jump. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. I kept checking the locks and peering out the windows, making sure everything was secure. When my husband finally came home, I was a wreck. He found me sitting on the couch, trying to keep it together, but barely holding it in. The kids were asleep, and the house was quiet again, but I couldn't stop the fear from gnawing at me. He asked if I was okay, if everything was all right, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him what had happened. I didn't want to sound paranoid, and part of me still couldn't believe it. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe I had just gotten scared over nothing. But when he walked through the door, he immediately noticed that the back porch light was on. I had made sure to turn it off earlier, so I knew it wasn't me. The porch light stayed on that night, flickering softly, as if to remind me of the feeling of being watched. That was the last time I ever felt truly safe in that house, not after that night. I never heard those footsteps again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been in the house. The unease lingered. Every time my husband left for work, I double-checked the locks, triple-checked the doors, and never stopped listening for sounds in the night. And I could never forget the phone call. The break-in. The reminder that sometimes the things we hear in the dark are not just our imaginations running wild. I grew up in Thailand, in a house that had a strange and unsettling feel to it, even as a child. I was 10 years old when my sister and I first moved in, and at the time, everything seemed normal at first. We had just arrived from a different city, so the new house was a change. It was a large, older house with dark wooden floors, high ceilings, and a grand staircase that creaked underfoot. It was the kind of house you might see in an old movie, spacious, with long hallways and rooms that seemed to stretch on forever. Our room was on the second floor, shared between my sister and me. We were close in age and had always shared rooms, so that part wasn't unusual. The room was big, and we had a small Jack and Jill bathroom that connected our room to another, completely empty room. I don't remember the empty room ever being used, but it was there, separated from us only by a door. The bathroom was shared with no one else. I remember the quietness of that space. It always felt like it was waiting for something to happen, like the silence was a little too much. At first, the house seemed peaceful, but it didn't take long before I started noticing strange things. The maid we had, who worked for us and came in every day, was always scolding us for small things, especially for leaving the ceiling fan on. She'd shout at us, but we were kids, and sometimes we'd forget. We never really understood why she cared so much about the fan. It was just a fan, and the house was hot. Everyone needed the breeze. But it wasn't just the maid's nagging that started to make us feel uncomfortable. The house itself seemed to have an energy that didn't sit right. During the day, when we were downstairs playing or eating, we would hear strange noises coming from the empty room upstairs. The sound of children laughing, running, and bouncing balls echoed down the hallway. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps, heavy and quick, almost like something was running back and forth. But every time we went up to check, the room was empty, just an old and used space. And yet, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. One evening, my sister and I had a friend sleepover. We were excited to have someone else there because it felt safer, like maybe if something weird happened, we wouldn't be the only ones experiencing it. We decided to make blanket tents in the empty room. The room was dark, and with just the dim glow of the streetlights coming in from the window, it felt even more isolated and quiet than usual. We could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan from our room, but other than that, everything was still. We were chatting and laughing, just like kids do when they stay up late, but then out of nowhere we heard it, a sound that froze us in place, a scratching noise, like nails dragging down a wall. It wasn't soft either. It was loud, and it came from the wall behind us. My heart started racing, and I could feel my stomach drop. I thought maybe it was just an animal outside, but the sound was too close, too specific. My sister, her friend, and I all went quiet, straining to listen, hoping we were imagining things. But the scratching continued, getting louder and more frantic. We just stared at each other, eyes wide, too scared to move or even speak. Then, before any of us could react, the doors to the armoire in the corner of the room creaked open, slowly, like someone was pushing them from the inside. It was the kind of sound that made your skin crawl, the kind of noise that means something's wrong. I don't remember who screamed first, but we all bolted for the door, pushing each other out of the way to get out of that room as fast as possible. We ran downstairs to my parents' room, out of breath, shaking, and not even able to explain what had just happened. We never went back into that room, and neither did my friend. After that night, we just avoided it altogether. The noises never stopped, though. We still heard the laughter and footsteps upstairs when we were downstairs. The sound of a ball bouncing, the echo of kids running in the empty room, but we never saw anyone. No one was there. The air in that room always felt wrong, like it was too cold in there no matter how hot the rest of the house was. One day, we were sitting in the backyard when the neighbor came over, an older man with a lot of wrinkles and a weathered face. He was quiet, but friendly. My mom was talking to him about something, and I was playing with my sister when he casually mentioned the swamp behind our backyard. It was something we had never really thought much about. The land behind our house sloped down into a thick, overgrown area of swampy ground. It wasn't somewhere we played or went near, but we knew it was there. The neighbor, though, mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He said, a lot of people used to dump their babies in that swamp. It was a place where people left their unwanted children. Not many people talk about it, but it's the truth. A lot of sad stories from these parts. At first, we didn't fully understand what he meant. Babies, dumped in the swamp. But the way he said it, so matter-of-factly, made something inside me twist. It was like a piece of the puzzle fell into place. even though we didn't have all the pieces yet. After that, I started putting things together in my head. The noises in the empty room upstairs, the strange feeling that had always been in that house, the scratching on the walls. Maybe it wasn't just a house that was old and creaky. Maybe it wasn't just a house where we heard things that couldn't be explained. Maybe there was something more to it, something darker. We never found out who or what made the noises in that room. We never understood what caused the weird feelings we'd get, the cold spots in the room, or the strange happenings that seemed to always happen when we least expected them. But after hearing the neighbor's story, everything clicked. It wasn't just an old house, it was a house with a history of loss and sadness, of things left behind. The next time we heard the laughter and the running footsteps upstairs, it didn't feel like a game. It didn't feel like kids playing, having fun. It felt like something else, something that was angry or sad or trapped in the house. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized the house was just a place where the past had left its mark, and maybe it wasn't finished yet. Maybe it would never be finished. The noises didn't stop for a long time, even after we moved out. We never told anyone else what had happened, not even our parents. It felt like something we couldn't explain, something too strange to put into words. But I still remember the feeling of that house, the weight of it, the way the air always felt a little too thick. And every time I think about it, I remember the swamp behind the house, the place where the past had been buried, and maybe, just maybe, where it still lingered. This happened just a few years ago, when I was still involved in something most people wouldn't exactly admire. It wasn't illegal where I was, not really, but it also wasn't something you could openly talk about at family dinners or post about online without getting a flood of judgment. I was working as an escort, strictly high-end clients, mostly men, some women. I wasn't ashamed of it, at least not at the time. I was young, fit, good-looking, and had a calm, agreeable presence. That kind of thing makes a difference. I never caused drama. I always cleaned up after myself. I treated my clients with respect, and in return, most of them did the same. It paid well, covered my rent, gave me some breathing room. But not every client is normal, even in that world. This one night stood out from the rest. It changed the way I saw myself, the way I saw people in general, and it left me with a cold feeling I still can't shake. He came recommended by a trusted contact, someone I'd worked with a few times, someone who had good taste in clients and never sent me into weird situations. That friend vouched for him heavily, said he was extremely generous, a bit eccentric, but safe and respectful. Old school type, he said. Likes massages, candles, calm energy. You'll probably enjoy it. I should have asked more questions. But at that time, I was tired of my regulars, bored of the same conversations, the same settings, the same flat-eyed faces. I was in a weird headspace too, burnout, craving intensity, something that would break the cycle. And the money he offered up front was generous, even for someone like me. Not just cash, but other perks, driver service, expensive food, even a bonus for showing up early. So I said yes. The meeting was in a city I didn't usually work in, about 3 hours away. He paid for everything, a round-trip train ticket, a hotel room just in case I didn't want to go straight home after. He even sent someone to pick me up at the station. A black car, spotless inside, no conversation. Just a polite nod from the driver and silence the whole ride. That should have been a warning, honestly. Silence like that always carries weight. The house was a mansion, not just large, but intimidating. Big wrought iron gates, tall hedges, huge oak trees lining a long driveway. The house itself was old but maintained with obvious care. Not modern, not glass and steel, but dark stone, thick windows, and ivy creeping up the sides. He was waiting at the door. He was older than I expected, maybe in his late 60s, tall, lean, and dressed neatly. Gray hair slicked back, wire-rimmed glasses, a turtleneck and slacks. He looked more like a retired professor than someone who paid for company. But I could feel the money on him, not just in what he wore, but in how he moved, how he looked at me. Calm and deliberate, like nothing I did could surprise him. He shook my hand, said something polite about the trip, and led me inside. The entrance was cool and dim, the floors covered with old rugs, the walls lined with paintings. No family photos, no mess. It was all too clean, like a museum. He brought me to a lounge room with thick velvet curtains, antique furniture, and a tray of food already waiting. Sliced meats, cheeses, grapes, pastries, and a carafe of juice. I was hungry, and I forgot the rule. You're not supposed to eat or drink in a stranger's place unless you brought it yourself. Everyone knows that. But he was warm, charming, and it had been a long ride. I took a glass of juice. He poured it. I ate a few things from the tray. Everything tasted fine. Normal. Just a little too sweet. The room had music playing softly, something classical, string instruments, and I remember the way the light from the candles flickered against the dark walls. He asked if I'd like to start with a massage, and I agreed. He led me to the bedroom. That's when I noticed the plastic sheets. They weren't just on the floor. They were tucked into the bed, and a second layer spread beneath it, extending out on the rug. It was weird. I'd had clients who were into water sports before, or who liked to be messy, but they always made that clear before anything started. Plus, those guys were always more casual about it. Towels, sometimes not this. This was methodical. Still, I told myself maybe he was just very careful about mess. Maybe he hated lotion stains or something. I was used to rationalizing things by then. He had a big, dark wooden box on the table by the bed. Old, heavy, polished. Next to it were thick white candles burning low, and a bottle of wine that neither of us touched. When I asked if he wanted to begin, he simply undressed and lay on the bed. His body told a story. Not in a metaphorical way, but literally. He had scars everywhere, mostly small but deep. Faint raised lines, dots, old cuts. They looked deliberate. His chest and back were mapped with them, and I could tell right away these weren't from surgery or accidents. They were made. Some recent, some old. I kept my reaction neutral. You don't comment on clients' bodies. Not unless they ask you to. The massage itself was quiet. No conversation. Just soft music, the scent of something floral in the air, and the sound of skin and breath. I did what I was paid for, worked his muscles, stayed professional, followed the rhythm. But something in the room was off. My head felt hot, my fingertips too sensitive, and my stomach kept tingling. Not a sick feeling, but amped up, like I'd had strong coffee and something else. My heartbeat was a bit too fast. My skin felt too thin. When it came time for the usual end, the kind of service most people expect, I climbed over him, lips on his neck, hands working. That's when he moved. He reached over slowly, calmly, and opened the box. Inside was silver. Not just tools, but things I didn't even know had names. Shiny, precise, some with tiny curved blades, others like clamps or sharpened picks. All clean, all organized. It was a surgeon's kit, but old-fashioned. Maybe antique. Polished metal and red velvet lining. He told me what he wanted, not in a creepy voice. Calm, polite, patient. I stared at the tools, then at him. My brain buzzed like it was full of static. I should have said no. I should have gotten off him, picked up my clothes, and walked out. But I didn't. Something in me, whether it was the juice, the hunger, the atmosphere, I don't know, snapped. Not in a violent way. More like a door quietly opening. I did it. I let him guide me. He didn't hurt me. In fact, he barely touched me except to show me where and how. But I used the tools. Not hard, not deep, just enough to draw a line, to see a drop. The way he responded was intense. He trembled, but didn't cry out. He looked at me like I was giving him air. And I can't lie, I felt powerful. Alive. Not scared, not disgusted. Just raw. The smell of blood, the way it beaded on skin, the way he breathed, everything was heightened. Like I could see and feel more than usual. That hour passed in a blur. I didn't bleed, but I held the knife. I drew the lines. His chest, his back, even his thighs. He lay still the whole time, except to guide me when I paused. His voice was soft. He called me exceptional once. I didn't answer. Afterward, he cleaned himself. We didn't speak. He handed me an envelope, thicker than any I'd ever received. He walked me to the car. I didn't go back to the hotel. I went straight to the station and took the next train out. The whole ride home, I didn't think. I just stared at my hands, wondering what I'd become. 3 months passed. I changed cities, got a new number. I slowed my work down. I started only accepting regulars, only people I could read well. No strangers, no odd offers. Then my friend contacted me again. Said the gentleman had asked for me specifically. That he'd pay for travel, hotel, everything. That I wouldn't regret it. I told him I'd left the business. He didn't push at first. But a week later, he messaged again. Said the gentleman was willing to come to me. That he was generous, discreet, and still remembered our night together. He offered triple. I refused. After a few more attempts, the messages stopped. I don't know if he ever came to my city. I started checking my locks more carefully after that. I changed my route to work. Nothing ever happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had opened a door inside me that I couldn't close. I don't do that work anymore. I've rebuilt myself in a different field. Safer, more predictable. I still have dreams about that house sometimes. Not nightmares, just flashes. The scent of blood, candlelight, silver tools on velvet. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had said yes. If I had welcomed him into my new life, let that darkness stretch a little further inside me. I think I could have lost myself. Not dramatically, quietly, softly, one visit at a time. But I didn't. I said no. I stopped, and I never looked back. That night still lives in my bones. I don't regret it exactly, but I'm not proud. It taught me something real. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who threaten or force. They're the ones who wait, who offer, who make you think it's your choice. And sometimes, the scariest part of a story isn't what someone else did to you. It's what you discovered about yourself. It was one of those impromptu trips that seemed like a good idea at the time, like we were chasing a vague sense of adventure. My boyfriend and I had decided to take the dogs and head up to Northern California on a whim. We didn't have much of a plan, just a vague idea of seeing the redwoods, getting away from the city, and finding something new to break up the monotony. We figured we'd figure it out as we went along, stopping where we wanted, driving until we were tired, maybe camping out under the stars. The trip was perfect at first, as these kinds of trips often are. The road stretched out in front of us for miles, the only real company being the hum of the tires against the pavement and the occasional whine of the dogs in the back. We didn't speak much, both of us lost in our own thoughts as we drove deeper into the forested hills of Northern California, the air growing cleaner, cooler as we reached the towering trees that made up the ancient redwood forests. It felt peaceful, disconnected, like we were stepping away from the world, and there was a certain beauty in that. The land out here had a calming effect, and I could feel the weight of the city lifting off my shoulders with each mile. A couple days into the trip, we ended up running into an old friend of my boyfriend's, someone he knew from way back when. She was in the area, living with some roommates, and invited us to crash at her place for the night. The offer was too good to pass up. No need to find a motel or pitch a tent when we could just stay in a real house with real beds, especially one in the middle of nowhere. The house she lived in was this old Victorian, and it had a charm that only came with age. It looked exactly like what you'd imagine when you think of a house that's been standing for over 100 years. Creaky floors, crooked windows, old brass doorknobs. There was a lot of character there. The entire place seemed to breathe with history. I remember walking in and feeling like we'd entered a different time. The walls were covered in old paintings, some of them faded, others strange. The kind of house that had probably seen a million stories in its time. My friend's roommate, who was also living there, gave us a quick tour. The house normally had 6 roommates, but it was summer and most of them were away. That night, it was just the 2 roommates and us. We all hung out in the living room, drinking beers, listening to music. The dogs, exhausted from the car ride, sprawled out on the floor. After a few hours, we decided to call it a night. The room we were staying in was a sitting room downstairs at the front of the house. It was right off the front door, with a big bay window looking out into the front yard. The trees outside gave the yard a sort of secretive feel, like the bushes could hide anything. It wasn't a big room, just enough space for the futon we'd be sleeping on and a few scattered chairs. It had a fireplace, though, and that made it feel cozy. The kind of room where you could curl up with a good book, except tonight, we wouldn't be doing any reading. We got settled in quickly, the dogs snuggled between us. I don't know why, but I remember that night being unusually quiet, the kind of quiet you only find in the deep woods. We both fell asleep pretty fast, drifting off to the sounds of the crickets and the occasional rustle from outside. But then, somewhere in the night, we were suddenly jolted awake by a sound that shattered the stillness. The old-fashioned doorbell rang, loud, sharp, echoing throughout the house. It wasn't one of those quiet little chimes. No, this was the kind of doorbell that felt like it could shake the house apart. I could hear someone moving upstairs, and then the creak of a door opening. A few moments later, the footsteps came back down. My boyfriend and I lay there in the dark, not sure what to make of it. A few minutes later, the door opened again. It was one of the roommates. She had come downstairs to check the door. She came back in, looking confused, but not too concerned. "Nothing there," she said, shrugging as she walked back upstairs. It didn't seem that odd to us at first. Maybe someone had just come by for a late-night visit. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to feel off. The doorbell was so loud, so invasive, that it seemed strange for anyone to be coming by at that hour. But we were in someone else's house. We weren't going to assume anything. We both drifted back to sleep, but it didn't last long. Not long after, the doorbell rang again. This time, I could hear the roommate come back down the stairs, sounding even more unsettled. The door opened, and she checked outside. Still nothing. She came back into the room and asked if we had heard it again. Her face was tight with worry. "Weird, right?" she said, looking back and forth between my boyfriend and me. I nodded, feeling that same unease creeping up my spine. She seemed uncertain, and I didn't like it. "I don't know," I said, trying to brush it off. "Maybe it's just the doorbell malfunctioning. Or maybe it's the wind." "I guess," she said, though I could tell she wasn't convinced. She lingered in the doorway for a moment before heading back upstairs. At that point, we decided we were just being paranoid. It was probably nothing. But that's when things took a turn for the worse. The next thing I know, I'm suddenly woken up to a low growl. A deep, menacing growl that didn't belong to any of us. It was my dog, one of our two. He was a friendly, happy-go-lucky dog, so for him to growl like that was beyond strange. It wasn't the kind of growl you'd expect from a dog that was just unsettled. This was a growl that came from the depths of his chest, like he was staring something down that he didn't trust. I lay there for a second, trying to make sense of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The growl deepened, and I could hear his claws clicking on the floor, moving like he was positioning himself. It wasn't just a warning growl. He was reacting to something he didn't like. "Hush," I whispered to him, my voice low and reassuring. But the growl didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to grow louder. My boyfriend stirred beside me, blinking his eyes open. "What's going on?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. I shook my head. "I don't know. He's acting weird." I tried to calm my dog down, but the tension in the room was so thick it felt suffocating. I kept thinking, maybe he's just unsettled from the unfamiliar surroundings. But that didn't explain the growl. I glanced at the window, the bay window only a few feet away from where we slept. The curtains were pulled shut, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. My dog was too still now, the growl fading into the kind of silence that made my skin crawl. I don't know how much time passed, but then everything happened in a blur. Suddenly, there was a sharp noise, like something hitting the window. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to snap me out of my dazed panic. Then I heard my boyfriend's voice yelling. "Get away from the window," he shouted, leaping up and smacking the window as hard as he could. My heart stopped. Through the glass, I saw it, a man's face, pressed against the window, staring at us. I froze, panic flooding through me. It wasn't a casual look, either. His face was inches away, just staring at us through the glass, and there was something about the stillness of it that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just someone walking by, casually glancing in. This man was standing there, watching, waiting. The intensity of it sent waves of fear crashing through me. Before I could react, my boyfriend was up, grabbing the axe we'd used for camping. He didn't hesitate. He rushed straight to the door, kicking it open and bolting out into the yard, shouting at the man. I followed him to the door, but didn't dare go outside. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I knew the man couldn't have just been walking by. My boyfriend chased him down the street, the man running as fast as he could. I could hear their footsteps echoing down the street in the quiet of the night, and I swear I could hear the man's breath hitching in fear. The whole thing seemed so surreal, like a nightmare that hadn't ended. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, my eyes darting back to the windows, waiting for some movement, some sign that the man would return. But the night passed quietly after that. The adrenaline from the incident kept us wide awake. My heart wouldn't stop pounding, and the thought of that man standing so close, just outside the window, made my skin crawl. In the morning, we all stayed up together, talking about what had happened, trying to process it. The roommate who had gone downstairs to check the doorbell earlier was visibly shaken, though she didn't say much. She knew something wasn't right, and we all agreed on one thing. That man had been watching the house, casing it out. The doorbell, ringing multiple times, it wasn't just a random occurrence. He was testing to see who was home. He wanted to know if it was just the girls or if someone else was around. And that's when the realization hit us. He wasn't there to just ring the doorbell. He was there for something much worse. We never heard from the man again, but the whole experience stuck with us. Every time I think back on it, I can't shake the feeling that it could have turned out a lot worse. He was a true monster, lurking right outside the house, watching us, waiting for the perfect moment. It was a reminder that sometimes the scariest things in life aren't ghosts or demons. They're the people who lurk in the shadows, just waiting for their chance. It was a late night in the middle of the week, maybe around 11 or 12, when I finally got home. I had been out with some friends, nothing too crazy, but just enough to get me a little tired and ready for bed. My parents were already asleep. My younger brother had long since gone to bed, and the house was quiet. It was just the usual. I didn't think anything of it as I slipped inside through the back door and quietly made my way upstairs to my room. It wasn't like I was trying to be sneaky or anything. I mean, I had been out with friends a lot lately, and my parents didn't really care about the time as long as I was home safe. I wasn't worried about waking them. The house was old and creaky, and everyone was used to the noise by now. I tossed my backpack down onto the chair by my desk and kicked off my shoes, the soles of my feet cold against the wooden floor. I still had a bit of homework left to do, so I sat at my desk, flipping open my textbooks and trying to get through the pages as quickly as I could. Time passed slowly. I was focused on finishing my work, but at the same time, I was feeling the weight of the day catch up with me. I pulled up a chair and sat back, stretching my arms over my head. It was late, and I was starting to feel the pull of sleep. I grabbed my phone, sent a quick text to a few of my friends to check in, and then plugged my headphones in to listen to some music. Nothing felt off. I wasn't nervous or unsettled. I did what I always did when I had a bit of time to kill before bed. Just relaxed, listened to my music, and let my mind wander. By the time the clock on my nightstand read 1:30, I knew it was time to hit the sack. So I turned off the lights, crawled into bed, and pulled the covers up to my chin. The house was still. My room was quiet except for the faint hum of my ceiling fan. I let out a deep breath and closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the day lift as I drifted off. But it wasn't long before I was jolted awake by a rustling sound coming from under my bed. I froze. At first, I thought it was just my cat, who was always getting into things. I had a pretty small room, and the floor space was limited, so sometimes she liked to curl up under my bed out of sight. It made sense that I'd hear some shuffling. I wasn't too alarmed at first, just a bit irritated that she was probably being a nuisance. I rolled over and pulled the blankets higher, willing myself to fall back to sleep. The rustling stopped, at least for a moment. But just as I was about to slip back into a peaceful sleep, the noise came again. A scraping sound, like something moving beneath the bed, something heavier than a cat. My heart picked up a little speed, but I pushed the thought out of my head. It was probably just the cat again. But then I heard it again, and this time it was different. There was more weight to the sound. It was louder. It sounded like something, or someone moving under there. My pulse quickened as my mind began to run wild. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The house was silent, save for the noises under my bed, and I was struck with this gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. Was it an animal? We lived near the woods, so it could be a raccoon or something else. A skunk, maybe? My mind raced as I tried to think of what animal would be big enough to make such a noise. A rabid raccoon? A coyote? Something larger? The longer I laid there, the more my imagination began to run wild. I turned over slowly, pulling the covers tighter around me. It took me a minute to gather the courage to peek. Every part of my body screamed at me to stay still and pretend it wasn't happening, but the curiosity gnawed at me, refusing to let go. I slid my body cautiously to the edge of the bed, trying to make as little noise as possible. My heart pounded in my chest, my breaths coming out shallow and quick. I leaned over, my body shaking slightly as I peered down through the small gap between the mattress and the bed frame. At first, I saw nothing, just the darkness under the bed. But then my eyes focused on something, a hair-covered arm. My entire body froze. I couldn't breathe. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. That wasn't a cat. It was a damn arm. A human arm, covered in hair, reaching up from beneath the bed. My heart started pounding in my ears. I felt this sickening wave of panic spread through me. My stomach turned, and I felt like I was going to vomit. My whole body was shaking now, not just with fear, but with a kind of paralyzing terror I had never known before. What the hell was I looking at? I knew I had to move, had to run. But something inside of me was terrified that the moment I made a sound or tried to stand, whatever was under my bed would reach up and grab me. My legs felt like they were made of lead, too weak to move. My mind kept playing out the worst-case scenarios. What if it wasn't just one person? What if there were more? What if he had a knife or a weapon? What if he was going to kill me right there, under my own roof? What if he was going to? No, I couldn't think about it. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, then opened them again. I was still staring at that arm, still frozen in place. Finally, I did it. I forced myself to move. With every ounce of willpower I had, I leapt out of bed, pushing myself as far from the bed as I could. I heard a scrape of movement from beneath the bed, but I didn't look back. I didn't dare. My heart was hammering in my chest as I dashed for the door. I couldn't scream. My voice was stuck in my throat, trapped by sheer terror. All I could do was run. I sprinted through the dark room, barely making it out the door. My feet skidded across the hallway floor as I rushed toward the stairs that led up to my parents' room. My legs were shaking with every step, but I kept moving, almost to the point of crawling up the stairs in sheer panic. Just as I reached the top step, I felt a hand grab my arm from behind. It was firm, not gentle, and it swung me around violently. Before I could even scream, a hand slammed over my mouth, muffling my desperate attempts to cry out. My heart was racing in my throat as I fought to break free. Shush, be quiet, a voice whispered urgently in my ear. I froze. I knew that voice. It was a guy I'd been on a few dates with, someone I had thought was decent. I could barely register the confusion in my mind. What the hell was he doing here? What the hell was he doing under my bed? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. I just wanted to see what you were like when you were alone. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's when the real horror hit me. It wasn't some random intruder. It wasn't some stranger. It was a guy I had been talking to, someone I had been trusting. All I could do was start crying. I didn't know what else to do. I pushed his hand off my mouth as hard as I could, sobbing uncontrollably. You need to leave. Now, I gasped through my tears. Just leave me alone. His grip on my arm tightened for a moment, but he didn't fight me. Instead, he looked at me with a strange, almost apologetic expression. He didn't even seem to understand why I was so freaked out. Can you just give me a ride home? He asked, as if nothing had happened. As if this was just some weird misunderstanding. I couldn't believe it. He thought he could just ask for a ride after breaking into my house and hiding under my bed? I didn't even dignify that with an answer. I just shoved past him and ran into my parents' room. When I told them about what happened, they didn't react like I expected. They were concerned, sure, but they kept saying he was a nice boy. They suggested I should just talk to him and let it go. But I couldn't. I couldn't forget that he had been under my bed, watching me, sneaking around my house in the dead of night. I didn't report him to the police. I didn't even call for help, because part of me still thought I should just handle it on my own. But that mistake haunted me for years. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how badly I had been violated. That night stayed with me. And even though I never heard from that guy again, the fear stayed in my bones for a long time after. It was a decision I made on a whim, or maybe it was the frustration building up inside me. I was 15, just a kid really, but the weight of everything felt much heavier. My parents had divorced a few years back, and things weren't exactly smooth sailing at my dad's house. We'd always had a strained relationship, and it was getting worse. I just wanted to get away from it all, to be somewhere else. I'd seen my mom only a few times since the separation, and the thought of her place was something I clung to. I knew I needed to get there, even if I had no idea how to find it. It was around midnight when I made up my mind. I grabbed a small bag, threw in a few essentials, just enough to get me through the night. A flashlight, my wallet, a couple of granola bars, and of course, I couldn't forget the map I'd drawn up in my head of how to get to her house. I figured it couldn't be too hard. I was familiar with the general area, even though I didn't know the exact street or number. But I thought I could figure it out. I grabbed my bike, the one I'd had for years. The tires were a little worn, and the gears weren't as smooth as they used to be, but it had always served me well. The cool night air hit me as I pedaled out of the driveway, feeling the city's stillness settle over me. It wasn't that late, only about 12:30, but the streets were quiet, and I could feel the weight of the night pressing in. I was nervous, but there was a sense of excitement in the air too. It was the kind of freedom that only comes when you're young, when you think you can handle anything, even if deep down you're not entirely sure you can. The ride took me through the quiet streets of Denver. The buildings were dark, and most of the cars were parked, their windows reflecting the faint light from the street lamps. I followed the path through Cherry Creek, hoping the bike path would lead me in the right direction. It was peaceful, too peaceful, and the sounds of the city seemed muffled by the night. The tires on my bike made a soft whirring noise as I rode, and the occasional rustle of leaves, or the distant hum of traffic, was all that broke the silence. The night felt like it was holding its breath. I had no idea how long I had been riding, but the streets were starting to look unfamiliar. I passed some areas I recognized, but it felt like I was getting farther from where I thought my mom's house was. I stopped for a second, checked the map in my head, but it didn't help much. My memory was a little blurry, and I realized I didn't really know the area as well as I thought. The street names meant nothing to me, and the houses didn't look familiar. Panic started to creep in, but I told myself to calm down. I had come this far, so there was no turning back now. I tried to retrace my steps, but as I turned down another street, the eerie quiet of the night began to feel unsettling. It was like I was in a different world, far from home. The more I rode, the more it felt like I was lost in a maze of streets, and the thought of not finding my way back was starting to gnaw at me. I told myself I would turn around in a few more blocks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That's when I first noticed him. I didn't hear him at first. There were no obvious sounds, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as if something had shifted in the air. It was almost like my senses had sharpened without warning. I glanced over my shoulder, just to make sure no one was behind me. That's when I saw him, maybe 10 feet back. A man. I couldn't make out much of him at first, but I knew he was there. I wasn't sure if I was just imagining things, so I kept pedaling. Maybe it was nothing, maybe just someone else out for a late-night ride. I told myself not to be paranoid, but the feeling that I was being watched wouldn't go away. I kept glancing behind me, but he never seemed to get any closer. He was just there, moving at the same pace I was. It was getting late, and my mind was playing tricks on me, but that feeling of being watched, of being followed, started to grow. Then, something happened that I'll never forget. As I rode down the path, I felt a sudden shift in the air. It wasn't just the feeling of being followed. It was the sensation that something was about to happen. That's when he passed me. The man. Only, he wasn't like any man I had ever seen before. He was naked. Completely naked. No clothes, no shirt, no pants, nothing at all. Just bare skin, riding a bike like it was the most normal thing in the world. I froze. I mean, how could you not? My heart skipped a beat as I watched him ride past me. He didn't even look at me. His focus was entirely ahead, his bare back exposed, and the awkwardness of the situation hit me all at once. There was something off about him, something I couldn't explain. It was more than just the fact that he was naked at 3:30 in the morning on a bike path in Denver. It was the way he moved, the way he seemed so completely oblivious to how strange he looked. He didn't seem uncomfortable. He wasn't running away from something. He wasn't nervous. He was just riding. For a few seconds, I couldn't process what was happening. My mind was trying to catch up to the bizarre reality unfolding in front of me. I tried to tell myself it was just some weird, drunk guy, maybe someone who had taken a dare or something, but even then, it didn't feel right. There was something unsettling about the whole thing. The way he was so calm, so detached from what he was doing, made my skin crawl. And then, just like that, he was ahead of me, riding into the darkness of the night. I could still see him, just a shadow against the dim light of the path, but his figure soon blended into the night. I didn't know what to do. My body was frozen in place for a moment, my mind racing, but I couldn't let myself be paralyzed. I had to move to get away, but where was I supposed to go? The bike path was empty, and I couldn't even tell if the guy had been real or if I had imagined him. I didn't want to find out, though. I didn't want to get any closer. I didn't know if he was dangerous or if he was just some weirdo, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to find out. I made the decision to head back. Fast. I turned my bike around, not even daring to look behind me. My legs pumped hard, pushing the pedals faster than they ever had before. I didn't care about my destination anymore. Didn't care if I ever made it to my mom's house. I just wanted to get out of there, away from the path, away from the weird, naked man who had somehow made everything feel wrong. The ride back felt like it lasted forever, but I didn't stop. Not once. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him coming up behind me, his naked body reflecting the pale light of the street lamps, but he never appeared. My breath came in sharp bursts, and my heart was racing, but I didn't dare slow down. The whole time, I kept thinking to myself, what the hell was that? Who was he? What was he doing out there? Eventually, I made it back to the familiar streets, the lights of the city bringing me a sense of relief. The quiet of the bike path was replaced by the low hum of traffic, and the weight in my chest slowly started to ease. But I never forgot that night. I never forgot that strange, surreal moment when I found myself face to face with a man who had no place in my world. I never went on midnight bike rides again. Even today, I don't know who he was or why he was out there, but I never felt safe on that bike path again. Something about it, about that night, felt wrong. Too wrong to ignore. And I've never been able to shake the feeling that I was just one bad decision away from something much worse happening. It was supposed to be a simple night out. The plan was basic: meet up with my two best friends, grab a few drinks, and have a good time. We were all excited for a casual walk to the bar, just a few blocks away. Nothing too crazy, just three friends out in the night, joking around, and looking forward to a good time. But something went wrong, horribly wrong, and I would never forget that night for as long as I lived. The night air had a sharp bite to it, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones if you're not careful. We weren't far from the bar, but a quarter of the way down the road, I realized how cold it actually was. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I could feel the chill creep up my spine. I glanced over at my friends, and I could tell they were thinking the same thing. Man, it's freezing. Let's just grab a cab, I said, rubbing my hands together to keep warm. They both agreed, and we turned back, heading toward the parking lot of the Royal Farms convenience store that sat on the corner. It wasn't far. The parking lot was empty, except for one cab sitting off to the side, its engine running with the lights on. The cabbie seemed to be dozing off, his head resting back on the headrest. He didn't notice us approach. We walked up to the cab and tapped lightly on the window. At first, there was no reaction. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Finally, the cabbie stirred. His eyes flickered open, and he motioned for us to get in. "Yeah, sure," he mumbled groggily, as if he had just woken up from a nap. We climbed in, and I ended up sitting in the middle, my friends on either side. As the door shut, I felt an uneasy chill run through me, but I brushed it off. It was just the cold, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. I figured we'd be in the warmth of the bar in no time, and that would be the end of it. The cabbie started the car, but as we pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed something strange. The cab didn't go in the direction I expected. We were heading toward the lane of traffic moving in the opposite direction. I looked at my friends, and they seemed just as confused as I was. You're going the wrong way," one of my friends said hesitantly, but the cabbie didn't respond. Instead, he just kept driving, swerving from one lane to the next in a strange zigzag pattern, back and forth, left and right. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. I looked out the window, expecting to see other cars, but the street was clear. It was as though the road was empty, just us and this cab weaving through the lanes like some kind of sick joke. I glanced over at my friends, and they were both staring at the cabbie, eyes wide with confusion and unease. "Hey man, can you just drop us off here?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm but failing miserably. But he didn't listen. He just kept driving, like nothing was wrong, like everything was completely normal. "Stop the cab," I said a little more forcefully this time. "We'll just get out right here." My heart was pounding in my chest now, the anxiety crawling up my spine. I felt trapped. I could see my friends looking at each other, both realizing something was wrong. We weren't just dealing with an incompetent driver. This guy wasn't right. I looked over at my friends, and they looked back at me, both of them as scared as I was. We didn't know what was going on, but we could feel that something bad was about to happen. The cabbie didn't even seem to care. He just kept driving, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he swerved and zigzagged, cutting across lanes like a drunk driver. I started to feel dizzy watching him move back and forth across the road. My stomach churned. Finally, the cabbie slowed down, and we came to a stop at a red light. I looked out the window, and I saw my friends scramble to get out. They were done. They weren't going to wait around for whatever this guy was planning. They opened the door and bolted out of the cab, running to the sidewalk without a second thought. But as soon as they got out, the door slammed shut. I hadn't even moved yet, and I was stuck in the middle. Before I could do anything, the cabbie stomped on the gas, and the car jerked forward. "No!" I screamed, trying to push the door open with my foot. "Stop!" But he didn't stop. The light had turned green, and he ran it, speeding through the intersection as I scrambled to keep the door open with my foot. My leg was stretched awkwardly, holding the door in place, but I could feel the weight of it pulling against me, trying to close. I screamed again, louder this time. I looked out the window, but I couldn't see my friends anymore. They were far behind, but they were still running after the cab, throwing anything they could find at it. They were desperate too, but nothing seemed to stop the cabbie. He just kept driving, and it felt like the whole world was moving in slow motion. I was holding the door open with all my might, my foot wedged against the frame. The car swerved again, this time making a hard right turn, and I heard the sickening crunch of metal on metal. He had hit something. A whole row of parked cars on the side of the road. I could feel the jolt, the way the car slammed into the side of the parked vehicles. My heart raced, and my mind was screaming at me to get out, to do anything to get away from this guy. I was still trying to hold the door open, my foot now numb with the pressure, but I couldn't hold it much longer. My mind was screaming that if I didn't get out soon, I would be trapped. I was going to be locked in this cab, and I had no idea what the hell was going to happen next. But there was one small miracle. The cab had stopped again. Another red light. The car was stuck behind a line of vehicles, unable to move forward. It was a chance. I didn't know how much time I had, but I had to act fast. I quickly slid over, my leg aching, my heart pounding. I reached for the driver's side door, and with a shaky hand, I tried to open it. It wouldn't budge. I yanked harder, my hands slipping from the handle, but finally, the door clicked open. Without a second thought, I threw myself out of the car, rolling onto the pavement. My legs were shaky, and I couldn't stand up right away, but I forced myself to my feet and sprinted away from the cab, my heart still racing. Just as I got to the curb, the light changed. The cabbie sped off again, leaving me in the street, breathless and shaken. My friends caught up with me, both of them panting, their faces pale and full of fear. The adrenaline was still surging through me, but I couldn't shake the terror I felt. My heart was still hammering in my chest, and I could feel the tremors in my hands. My friends were too out of breath to say much, but we all knew how lucky we had just been. We watched the cabbie drive away, disappearing into the night, and for a moment, none of us could move. When we finally gathered our thoughts, we pulled out our phones and dialed 911. We explained the situation, but when we tried to give them the cab's license plate number, it was too blurry to make out. The image was useless. The dispatcher told us to stay where we were, and help was on the way, but by the time they got there, the cabbie was long gone. We waited around, but no one ever found the cabbie. No one ever came back with any information, and I couldn't stop wondering if he had done this to other people before. The police took the report, but I never heard anything more about it. As for me, I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cab, that driver, weaving through the lanes like he was out of his mind. My leg was bruised, but I was lucky to be alive. I was shaken, but I had made it out. I still think about that night sometimes. I don't know if the driver was just crazy, or if he was trying to do something much worse, but I never got into a cab again after that. I couldn't. The fear of being trapped again was too much to bear. I used to work at a church as the head sound engineer. The bulk of my job was tied to the busy Sunday services, setting up, running sound during the service, troubleshooting, and making sure everything went smoothly. But sometimes there were tasks that I could do whenever I got the chance. One of these tasks was duplicating CDs of sermons for people who would like a copy to listen to at home, in the car, or wherever. These requests would come in now and then, sometimes for whole series of sermons that spanned months. When that happened, I would have to set aside a chunk of time to fulfill the request, because duplicating the CDs took quite a while. Since I was a night owl, I often found myself heading into the church in the middle of the night to take care of these tasks. I had a key to the building, and the church was familiar to me. It didn't bother me to be there alone. In fact, I liked the peace and quiet. I'd been working at the church for years, and I had spent countless hours in that building by myself, especially after dark. I could navigate it without turning on a single light, just by the ambient glow coming in from the streetlights outside. That soft, dim light from the windows illuminated enough for me to see where I was going, but everything else in the building remained pitch black. The church had a very straightforward layout: a foyer, doors into the sanctuary where the services were held, and a balcony above the sanctuary where the sound booth was located. That's where the CD duplicator was set up. There was only one door to the balcony, and it could be locked from the inside. The sanctuary itself was wide open, with no barriers separating the balcony from the pews below. It offered a clear view of the whole room: every pew, every chair, the stage, and the pulpit. Acoustic-wise, the building was excellent. If someone spoke on stage, you could easily hear them from the back or the balcony. The sound would travel well, and if you couldn't see the person talking, you could still figure out exactly where the sound was coming from. One particular night, I headed to the church around 1 or 2 in the morning. I had to take care of a CD duplication request for someone who had asked for several of the recent sermons. The church was completely empty, as usual at that hour, and the silence inside was almost comforting. I had done this many times before, coming in when no one else was around, just me and the peaceful stillness of the church. It was my routine. When I reached the top of the stairs to the balcony, I turned on the single light above me, the only light in the whole sanctuary. It was positioned about 15 feet above my head, just enough to give me light to work by. I had no need for anything more than that. The rest of the building remained dark, just the way I liked it. I sat down at the sound booth and began my work, placing CDs in the duplicator and getting them started. The task was simple and mindless, and I didn't think much about anything as I worked. About an hour passed in the peace and quiet. The hum of the duplicator and the occasional sound of a CD being swapped were the only noises in the entire building. Then suddenly, a sound cut through the stillness, a sharp, unmistakable clink-clink, coming from somewhere below me. I froze. My heart jumped in my chest. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, and it was unmistakable. I recognized the sound right away. It was the distinct clinking of ceramic coffee mugs. You might think that's a strange thing to recognize, but after working in the church for years, I had gotten used to that sound. The church had a coffee house of sorts, where people would get coffee before and after services. They always used ceramic mugs, basic, run-of-the-mill mugs. In my time there, I had seen hundreds of them, and often, the coffee house staff would walk around the church picking up used mugs that had been left behind by people. I had seen them load multiple mugs into one hand, and as they did, the mugs would sometimes knock together, making that clink sound. It had become a background noise for me, something I never really thought about, but was familiar with nonetheless. But now, in the middle of the night, hearing that sound in the empty, dark sanctuary, it struck me as odd. I couldn't explain why it was happening now, of all times. It shouldn't have been possible. The church was locked up, and no one else was supposed to be here. The sound wasn't just a random noise. It was coming from somewhere specific, about 20 to 30 feet ahead and below me, near the left-hand side of the sanctuary in the middle of the pews. I stood there, staring down into the darkness of the sanctuary, trying to figure out what was going on. I couldn't see anything, just the vague outlines of the pews in the dim light coming from the street outside. I could still hear the faint clinking sound. It was coming from the exact spot I had heard it earlier, but there was nothing down there that could explain it. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that began creeping over me. I didn't want to get spooked, but something about that sound was unsettling. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me. I decided to go check it out. I left the sound booth, descended the stairs, and went into the foyer to turn on all the lights. That made me feel a little better. At least the entire sanctuary would be lit up now, and I would have a clearer view of everything. I walked into the sanctuary, determined to find the source of that strange noise. I had pinpointed exactly where it was coming from, but when I got down there was nothing to be heard. I walked around the pews, checking for any mugs that might have been left behind. People were always careless about leaving their coffee mugs around, but I found nothing out of the ordinary. I dropped to my knees in the front of the sanctuary to check underneath the pews. From this angle, I could see under each row of chairs at once. Sure enough, there were a few coffee mugs scattered under the pews, just as I had expected. But when I examined them closely, I realized something. None of them were close enough to make the clinking sound I had heard. Some were several feet away from each other, and there was no way they could have been knocked together. I didn't know what to make of it. The sound had been so distinct, so clear. But here I was, in the exact spot where it had come from, and there was nothing that could explain it. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. I stood up, feeling a bit foolish. I left the sanctuary, turned off the lights in the foyer, and went back up to the sound booth. The church was silent once again. I felt better now that I had checked everything out, and I tried to push the weird sound out of my mind. I went back to duplicating the CDs, trying to focus on my work. Then it happened again. The unmistakable sound of clink clink. The same noise, in the same spot. My heart dropped. I felt that familiar chill run down my spine. There was no way this could be happening. I had just checked. I knew the mugs weren't near each other. But there it was again. I rushed down the stairs, flipped on all the lights, and entered the sanctuary once more. This time, I kneeled down and crawled under the pews, checking every mug I could find. There was nothing. No mugs clinking together. No explanation for the sound. I couldn't make sense of it. I went back to the foyer, a little rattled now. I left one light on in the sanctuary and locked the door to the balcony, feeling a little better with it locked. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I went back upstairs, determined to finish what I started. For the next half hour, there was nothing. The room was silent again, and I began to relax. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was all in my head. But then, just when I thought I was safe, clink clink. I jumped, the sound hitting me like a jolt of electricity. My pulse raced, my skin prickled with fear. It couldn't be real. It just couldn't. I looked down into the sanctuary from the balcony, and still there was nothing. No explanation. I stayed in the booth frozen, hoping it would stop. But then, something happened that I can't explain. The entire room started to shake. It was a deep, rumbling vibration that seemed to come from nowhere. My stomach dropped. The soundboard in front of me lit up, all the LEDs turning red. I checked the board, but there were no mics plugged in, no amps on. The speakers weren't even powered on, or at least I didn't think they were. This wasn't a technical issue. The rumbling continued for about 30 seconds before it stopped, just as suddenly as it had begun. The room went silent again. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was completely shaken. I bolted out of the church, locking the door behind me. I didn't even grab my things. I just needed to get out. I never went back to finish those CDs that night. I never figured out what happened. To this day, I can't explain it. I've tried to rationalize it, but the truth is, I don't have an answer. It's not like I saw anything strange or heard any ghostly voices. There was no supernatural encounter. But what happened in that church, something about it didn't feel right. It's a mystery that's never been solved, and I don't know if I'll ever understand it fully. I woke up that morning with a weight on my chest that didn't feel like my own body. It wasn't physical, nothing like that, but it felt thick and present, like air that had gone too heavy to breathe. I remember lying still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out if I was sick or if I just had a bad dream I couldn't remember. The light coming in through my bedroom blinds was the same as always, soft and slanted, showing the dust in the air. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt right. I just stayed there, unmoving, listening to the silence. Even the usual morning sounds, birds, a dog barking, cars passing in the distance, sounded like they were too far away, like someone had moved the world slightly off-center, and I hadn't caught up. After a few minutes, I forced myself to sit up. My legs felt weird, like they didn't want to move in time with me, like there was a slight delay between thinking about standing and actually standing. I rubbed my arms, feeling the skin under my fingertips, just to reassure myself I was real. The house was cold, not freezing, but off, like the heat hadn't kicked in, though it should have. I pulled a hoodie on and walked down the hall, still feeling like I was dreaming with my eyes open. The hallway stretched longer than it usually felt. I remember that specifically, how I passed the old family photos on the wall, the one of me as a toddler holding a popsicle, the one of all of us at the lake, and they looked sharper than normal, like someone had increased the contrast on them. My feet made no sound on the carpet, which felt wrong. Even the scent of the house, the mix of laundry and old wood, and whatever we'd cooked last night was duller. I was moving through something real, but it didn't feel that way. Breakfast was just me and the usual things. A bowl of cereal, toast, a glass of milk. I remember pouring it and watching the stream flow into the glass, thinking it looked too smooth, like it was fake. Everything felt slowed down. I sat at the kitchen table, which had that wicker weave to it, with a thick piece of glass on top to make it level. Beneath the glass was a faded map of Europe. It had always been there. I used to trace the rivers with my finger as a kid while I ate cereal. That morning, without really thinking, I set the glass of milk down on the table. I remember the small thud it made. It left a round ring of condensation on the glass, and something about that tiny sound made me pause. I looked down, eyes catching on the label under the bottom edge of the glass. The cup had landed right on top of the word Spain, covering up the S, so that only the letters Pain were visible through the water droplets and the distorted glass. I stared at it longer than I should have. My breath slowed. The feeling that had been building since I woke up, this thick dread like pressure behind my eyes, doubled. It was such a stupid thing. Just a word under a cup. It meant nothing. But in that moment, I felt it meant everything. My stomach went cold. I could almost feel my heart slowing down in response. I sat there staring at that word, pain, while my cereal got soggy. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink the milk. I remember pushing the glass slightly to the left to uncover the full word again, but it didn't help. The feeling was there, like something was coming. Something I couldn't stop, couldn't change. I didn't know what. I didn't know why. I just felt it, like I'd stepped out of line with time and caught a scent of something meant for later. I got dressed like normal after that. Same jeans, same hoodie, same school bag. But the dread didn't lift. If anything, it grew tighter. I walked to school slowly, like I was bracing for something to fall on me from the sky. I looked at people's faces as I passed them on the sidewalk, wondering if they could feel it too. Nobody looked back. Everything was just continuing like it always did. At school, the feeling kept building. I felt lightheaded and too present at the same time. I wasn't scared of anything specific. There was no voice telling me something clear. But everything in me screamed that the day was wrong, that it was already broken, and we were all just walking through the pieces of it. I kept looking around at people, waiting to see someone else stop and notice, but nobody did. Everyone was laughing, talking, opening lockers like it was just another day. It wasn't. I knew it wasn't. That was the part that scared me the most. That I knew something was about to happen, but I didn't know what. I didn't want to be alone with it. That made it worse. The first part of the school day blurred. I don't remember anything about the first few classes. I must have been there. I wasn't absent, but my memory just has blank space where those hours should be. Like my brain didn't think they were important enough to hold on to, because everything that mattered was still ahead. Later that morning, during a science class, we went outside. There was this wooded area just past the edge of the schoolyard where mushrooms like to grow, especially after rain. We were supposed to collect and identify them. It was something we did every year. I remember the cold air on my face, the scent of wet leaves and earth, and the sound of sneakers moving over the dirt paths. I remember bending down to pick up a cluster of small brown mushrooms, brushing the soil off them with my fingers. Even out there, the dread stayed with me. It felt almost worse under the trees, like the sky was watching and we were too small to be noticed. After maybe 20 minutes, the teacher called us back in. Everyone was talking about the weird shapes of the mushrooms they found, some laughing, a few comparing notes. I lagged behind the others, dragging my feet. I didn't want to go back inside, but I didn't want to stay out there either. There was no right place to be. As we stepped back into the hallway, the noise hit us. Not from students talking, but from inside one of the classrooms where someone had a TV on. I remember hearing the anchor's voice, fast and nervous. That wasn't normal for school. TVs were only ever on during announcements or special events. The tone of the voice made my stomach twist. We gathered in the classroom, most of us standing near the back, and watched the screen. A plane had hit one of the twin towers. The image on the screen was surreal, smoke billowing out of a gaping hole in the building. I didn't understand at first. It didn't make sense. People were saying it had to be an accident, some kind of mistake. But then, as we were standing there, another plane came into view on the live feed. It struck the second tower in real time, right in front of us. I still can't describe the way that moment felt. It was like something snapped deep inside me. The feeling of dread that had followed me since I woke up hit its peak, like it had all been leading to this one point. My legs went cold. My hands started shaking. I felt like I was going to throw up, but I didn't. I just stood there, watching the smoke, watching the fire, watching the people running in the streets, dust-covered and terrified. Some people in the room started crying. Others just stood silent. The teacher turned the volume down and didn't say much. No one really did. There were no right words. We were just kids, watching something that didn't seem possible. It was only later, much later, that I thought about the milk glass again. The word under it. The way it had cut away everything but pain. How I'd known something was coming, but not what. How useless that knowledge had been. Before that day, I used to have dreams. Not the normal kind. These were small flashes of things that hadn't happened yet. Maybe once or twice a year, I'd dream a few seconds of something meaningless. A conversation in a hallway, a bird landing on a windowsill, a paper blowing across the street. Always small things. But when the moments would finally happen in real life, days, weeks, or even months later, I'd remember them exactly, with the same camera angle, the same light, the same sound. It didn't scare me. It just felt like part of me lived slightly ahead of everything else. After September 11th, that stopped. Completely. No more flashes. No more dreams of things to come. It was like that part of my mind shut off and never turned back on. Years passed. The memory of that day didn't fade, but it settled into the background. I went through school. I moved out. Got a job. Life kept going, the way it does. But I never forgot the feeling of that morning. The weight in my chest, the silence that was too thick, the strange stillness of everything. I'd never felt it before, and I've never felt it since. It didn't repeat. It didn't return. It just came once and left something behind. There's no explanation for it. I've tried to make sense of it, tried to tell myself it was coincidence, that my brain made connections after the fact, that I only remembered the details that lined up, but none of those answers feel right. They feel too neat, too clean. The truth is, I don't think time works the way we think it does. I don't think it's a straight line that we move along. I think sometimes it folds, or cracks, or lets something slip through from later or before. Maybe I caught the edge of something that day. Maybe we all do sometimes, but we just don't recognize it. All I know is that I woke up on a normal morning with a dread I couldn't explain. I saw a stupid word under a milk glass that shouldn't have mattered. I went through my day carrying a fear that wasn't mine yet. And then, the world changed. And after that, something in me went quiet. I haven't had a dream of the future since. We had been on safari for a few days now, traveling through the thick African bush, following a trail of dusty roads, and checking in on the local wildlife. It was one of those once-in-a-lifetime trips, something that would be talked about for years to come. I had been lucky enough to go on this safari with a small group, and everyone in the group seemed to be in awe of the surroundings. The guide, who had become like a quiet friend by this point, had a calm way about him that put us at ease. He had been a professional for years, but little did we know, the day we were about to have would make all the previous days seem like a walk in the park. That morning started like any other, with the sun barely cresting over the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the veldt. The early morning light was perfect for spotting wildlife, and I felt the excitement of anticipation rise in my chest. Our guide told us we were heading to a clearing, where the chances of spotting something interesting were high. As we approached the clearing, I could see the vast expanse of tall grasses swaying gently in the wind. The truck moved slowly, and the tires crunched over the dirt road. My heart raced a little. There was something about the open space that always seemed to make everything feel a bit more dangerous, especially when you didn't know what was lurking in the shadows of the trees lining the clearing. When we stopped, the guide didn't say anything immediately. He simply put the truck in park and scanned the horizon. His calm demeanor shifted slightly, just enough for me to pick up on it. I looked at the others in the vehicle, noticing they too were now paying close attention. The guide's eyes were darting around. He was looking for something, or maybe avoiding something. Whatever it was, it didn't sit right with him. Then, without warning, he turned to us, his voice a sharp command. "Get back in the car. Now." Before we could react, he was already moving, slamming the door shut and rushing to the driver's side. I froze for a split second, trying to process what was going on. Something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what. And then I heard it, a loud, thunderous trumpet. The kind of sound that seemed to shake the very air around us. It was unmistakable. An elephant. A huge, pissed-off elephant. My heart dropped into my stomach. I turned around in time to see it, the massive form of the elephant charging toward us. Its ears flared wide, and its trunk was swinging back and forth in the air. The ground seemed to tremble with every step it took. I couldn't believe how fast it was. It was coming straight for us. "Go! Go!" the guide shouted from the front, his hands desperately turning the ignition. But nothing happened. The truck didn't start. It sputtered, groaned, and then died. My blood ran cold. We were sitting ducks. He tried again, his face a picture of frustration. The second attempt failed, too. The elephant was getting closer, and I could hear its trumpeting growing louder, more aggressive. The guide's hands were now shaking as he turned the key for a third time. Nothing. I was already grabbing for my seatbelt, ready to throw myself down onto the floor if need be. I knew it was over if we didn't get that truck moving. Third time, damn it. The guide shouted, "Come on, come on." It was like time was moving in slow motion. The truck still refused to start, and I could see the elephant's massive feet pounding the earth, just seconds from reaching us. The air was thick with the smell of dust and the rising tension. Then, on the fourth try, the engine roared to life. The guide slammed the gas pedal, and the truck lurched forward with a jolt. We were moving fast, too fast. I glanced back just in time to see the elephant charging after us. It seemed to be almost flying across the ground, but thankfully we pulled away. We sped through the dirt road, bouncing up and down in the truck as the engine strained under the pressure. As we tore away from the clearing, the guide let out a shaky breath. The rest of us were silent, still in shock. The guide's hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. That was close," he muttered under his breath. We didn't say anything. What was there to say? We had narrowly avoided being trampled by one of the largest land animals on Earth. What else could you do but try to laugh? But even though I wanted to laugh, my stomach churned. I wasn't sure what had just happened or how close we had come to losing it all. Our guide had mentioned, in passing before, how elephants could be territorial and protective, but I hadn't realized how serious it could be until now. As the day wore on, I thought about it less and less. We continued the safari, watching wildlife from a safe distance, even enjoying some incredible views of giraffes and zebras across the plains. It felt like the morning's close call was a distant memory, something we could all laugh about later. But fate had other plans. By the time we were heading back to camp, it was starting to get dark. The sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows over the land. We were driving along a narrow path, flanked by thick brush and a few scattered trees. The sky was painted in hues of purple and pink, and I started to relax. That's when we saw him. There, in the middle of the path, was a bull elephant. But something was off. He wasn't acting like the others we'd seen during the day. His movements were erratic, almost drunken. His head swayed from side to side, and he staggered as though he could barely hold himself up. I realized in an instant that he was in the midst of a stupor. The trees lining the path were full of ripe, sugary fruit. Fruit that elephants love to knock down and let ferment in the sun, creating a kind of natural alcohol. I'd heard about it, but seeing it in person was another thing entirely. Our guide slowed the truck to a crawl, his eyes wary. The bull elephant's erratic movements made it hard to predict where he would go next. He was huge, far bigger than the one we'd seen earlier. And he seemed angry. His ears were flapping wildly, and his trunk was swinging around like it had a mind of its own. We stopped about 50 feet away, but that didn't matter. The bull saw us, and he didn't like it. He let out a deep, rumbling trumpet, and before I knew it, he was charging us. Not full speed, but enough to make us jump in our seats. Our guide slammed the truck into reverse, but the truck barely budged. We were stuck in the middle of the path with a massive, drunken elephant charging us. We couldn't move forward, and we couldn't move back fast enough. For what felt like hours, the bull elephant circled the truck, getting closer with each pass. He would charge at us, stop suddenly, and then turn away again. It was like a twisted game of cat and mouse, except we were the mouse. Every time he came toward us, I held my breath, wondering if this would be the time he would finally charge full speed. The truck was so slow in reverse, and we couldn't risk just hitting the gas and potentially provoking him further. So we waited. We sat in silence, hearts pounding, every nerve on edge. The whole time, I could see the guide's face, pale with fear and concentration. This wasn't just a close call, it was a nightmare. My hands were slick with sweat, and my throat felt dry. I glanced at the others in the truck. Some of them were holding their breath, others were gripping the seats, looking anywhere but at the elephant. After what seemed like an eternity, the bull elephant finally gave up. He stopped his game and moved off into the bush. He swayed unsteadily as he wandered away, his back slowly disappearing into the trees. But even as he moved away, my heart didn't stop racing. We weren't out of danger yet. It took several more minutes of slow, careful driving before we were finally able to make our way to camp, where we could breathe a sigh of relief. When we finally made it to the camp, I could see the guide leaning against the truck, still trembling. The rest of us stumbled out, all of us shaken to the core. But the guide? He was different. His calm, collected demeanor was gone. He had been quiet for the rest of the ride, his eyes downcast. I couldn't help but feel bad for him. This was his first safari back after 2 years off due to an elephant charge that had nearly killed him. He had caught the tusk in his side during that attack, and I had no idea how he'd made it through. But now I understood why. After the experiences we had, I realized just how close he had come to death, and how close we had come too. As we gathered in the mess hall, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The adrenaline was still pumping through my veins, and even though I was sitting down, I could still feel the remnants of that fear. The day had started off as an adventure, a dream come true, but by the time the sun had set, it had turned into something far more real. Something terrifying. I grew up on a small farm that connected to a game preserve. Our property stretched out into a wild part of the woods, and my brothers and I spent most of our childhood running through it. It was our playground. No rules, no boundaries, just wide open spaces filled with towering trees, fields, and the sound of wildlife. Looking back, it was the kind of freedom that most kids never get to experience. We were practically feral in those woods, spending entire days out there with only the occasional shout from our parents to get us to come back for dinner. But over the years, something about those woods started to make me uneasy. It wasn't constant, but more often than not, it was at night. And it wasn't like I was afraid of the dark. There was just something off. I couldn't explain it. The woods felt different at night, like they were holding something back. I'd feel it when I went out to the outhouse, which was farther than most people's bathroom would be. Every trip out there, especially at night, felt like I was being watched. It wasn't an obvious feeling, like someone was standing in front of me, but it was that creeping sense that there was something in the trees just out of sight, watching and waiting. I tried to ignore it for the most part. After all, the woods were vast, and I spent so much time in them that it was easy to convince myself I was just imagining things. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't all the time, just sometimes. Maybe a few times a month, the feeling would come, and I'd feel this weight in my stomach, like something bad was waiting for me. But again, it wasn't enough to make me stop going out there. I kept on with my usual adventures, hiking, fishing, chasing after the dogs. The woods were too familiar for me to be afraid of them. Then one day, when I was about 14 or 15, I decided I needed some plants for a terrarium I was putting together. It was a spring day, one of those perfect, warm days when everything is buzzing with life. The sun was shining, the air smelled fresh, and I figured it'd be a good time to go for a walk and pick out some plants. So I grabbed a bag and started down the dirt lane behind our house, heading toward the edge of our property where the woods began. I had walked this path 1,000 times, usually with the dogs at my side. It was only about a 40-foot climb up the bank into the woods, and I felt totally comfortable there. The trees were familiar, the ground soft with moss, and there was a quiet hum of life in the air. I'd seen deer in these woods, squirrels, birds, even a few wild turkeys once in a while. It was peaceful, and I felt like nothing could go wrong. The sounds of nature, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant chattering of squirrels, filled the air. It was exactly the kind of day you picture when you think about the outdoors. But then, about 20 minutes into my search for plants, I noticed something odd. It was so subtle at first that I almost ignored it. The usual buzz of the woods, the chirping birds, the rustling leaves, had gone completely silent. It wasn't like it was a sudden quiet, like someone had turned off the volume. It was more like everything just stopped. No birds, no squirrels, no wind. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. I didn't think much of it at first. Sometimes wildlife goes quiet for a moment, so I carried on, crouching low to the ground and pulling up plants from the soft earth. But as I walked a little farther, it hit me again. The The silence was getting deeper, thicker. It wasn't just the usual quiet of the woods, it was unnatural. And then, from somewhere deeper in the trees, I heard a faint rhythmic tapping. At first, I figured it was a woodpecker. I'd heard them before, drumming on trees, making their distinctive noise. But the tapping didn't stop when I stopped moving. It followed me. Each time I took a step, the tapping would pick up, as if something, was matching my pace. It wasn't very loud, but it was persistent. I paused, trying to listen more carefully. Maybe it was a bird after all. I kept walking, listening to the tapping grow louder with every step. It sounded like a woodpecker, but there was something wrong about it. The rhythm was off. It wasn't the rapid pecking sound you'd expect from a woodpecker. This noise, it felt deliberate. Slower, almost like a steady beat. And the worst part was that it only happened when I moved, stopping the moment I stood still. By this point, my stomach had started to churn. It wasn't like the usual quiet fear I'd get at night. This was something different. It felt like something was trying to get closer. Something was using the tapping to move with me. I'd take a step, and the tapping would follow, always in sync, always just behind me. I tried to shake it off. I was being ridiculous. It was probably just a weird woodpecker that I couldn't see. Maybe it was another animal, just moving around in the underbrush. But the tapping kept following me, getting louder and closer, until I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. It was no longer just a tapping noise. It had shifted. Now it sounded like someone was slapping their thighs in rhythm, like a person walking and snapping their legs with each step. The sound was so close now that I felt a cold, tight feeling in my chest. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My brain was screaming at me that something wasn't right. That sound shouldn't have been coming from anything natural. I tried to tell myself it was still just a woodpecker, but the tapping, now louder and more insistent, was something else. It didn't belong in the woods. It didn't belong in the silence of the spring day. My gut told me that whatever it wasn't friendly. I stepped backward, trying to move quietly, but the tapping kept following me closer now. My mind raced. It had been following me all along, and now it was getting too close. I don't know why I thought to do it, but I suddenly bolted. I didn't think. I didn't stop to analyze what was happening. I just ran. I flew through the underbrush, dodging trees, tripping over roots, pushing myself faster and faster. I could hear the tapping getting louder behind me, closer, as if whatever it was had realized that I knew it was there. It was chasing me, or maybe it was just walking after me, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of there. I pushed harder, stumbling through the woods until I reached the edge of the bank. I didn't even hesitate. Without thinking, I threw myself over the side of the bank, not caring about the rocks or the brush I'd crash into. I didn't stop until I was on the road, breathless and terrified, my heart pounding in my chest. The road was a boundary, something that felt safe. I had no idea why I thought it would stop at the road. It was just a gut feeling, like an instinct that screamed at me to get to the road and out of the woods. But it didn't stop. The tapping followed me to the edge of the road, just a few feet into the trees, before it stopped altogether. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel it, as if whatever it was still watching me from the shadows. I stayed on the road, moving slowly, my eyes scanning the tree line as I walked toward home. It followed me for a little while, about 20 feet into the woods, just enough to make sure I knew it was still there. Then it stopped. The tapping vanished. The woods around me were still again, and I could feel the pressure in my chest loosen, though the dread never completely went away. I didn't tell anyone that day. I don't even know why. Maybe I was embarrassed, or maybe I thought I was just imagining things. But I kept it to myself. For years. Not even my brothers knew, and they would have thought I was crazy. I didn't want them to look at me like I was some scared kid. I kept it locked away, pretending nothing happened. It wasn't until one night, years later, that I finally told my mom and little brother. We were sitting around the kitchen table, just talking about old memories, when the conversation somehow shifted to the woods. I didn't expect it, but I just blurted it out. I told them about the tapping, about how it had followed me, how I'd felt something was out there. My little brother, who had always been the quiet one, just looked at me and said, "That's why I stopped going back there." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Then he spoke again, slowly. "It followed me once, from the other side of the road." I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. My little brother, who had always been so fearless, had experienced the same thing. Whatever it was that had followed me that day, it had followed him too. That was when I knew. It wasn't my imagination. Whatever had been out there, whatever had been tapping behind me in the woods, it wasn't natural. It wasn't just a weird animal. It was something else. And it wasn't just me. I was 16, living with my dad in this old house that always felt a little off. It wasn't anything supernatural, nothing like that, but the house had its quirks. The kind of place where the creaks of the floorboards made you feel like someone was always following you, where the old pipes would groan at odd hours, and it would make you jump, even though you knew it was just the house settling. I wasn't used to it yet, not fully. At that point, I'd been living there for about a year, and there were still moments when the silence felt too loud, too heavy, like the house was holding its breath. This particular night started like any other. It was late, probably around 1 a.m. I had my phone on, scrolling through some random stuff, just killing time before I fell asleep. The usual routine for me. Dad had already gone to bed, and I was alone in my room, tucked under the covers, lying on my side facing the wall. I had my back to the room, the way I always slept. It felt safe that way, like I wasn't leaving myself open to something sneaking up behind me. I wasn't really tired, but I knew I had to get some sleep eventually, so I started to settle down. And then, out of nowhere, it happened. It was so subtle at first that I thought I imagined it. But then it happened again. A soft creak. It was just a slight shift in the mattress, like someone had sat down at the foot of my bed. A weight pressed down on the bed, just a little, but enough to make the springs groan softly under the pressure. The kind of creak you'd hear if someone were sitting on the edge of your bed, but I knew I was the only one in the room. I froze. My heart skipped, then thudded in my chest. It was like the air thickened, and the world slowed for a second. I couldn't explain why I didn't immediately get up or call out. I guess I was too scared to move, like my body couldn't even process what was happening. My instinct was to lay still, to try and figure out what was going on. The room was mostly dark, with just the moonlight sneaking through the blinds. It cast these long, eerie shadows that stretched across the walls and floor. I could feel the weight shift again, the bed sinking down even further. It was like someone was really sitting there, right at the foot of my bed, just waiting. I couldn't see much from where I was lying, but I didn't need to see much. I could feel it, that oppressive presence. It was like the room itself had become heavier, more suffocating. I barely dared to move, but I had to look, had to make sure I wasn't just imagining things. Slowly, I shifted, half sitting up and turning toward the foot of the bed. My heart was hammering in my chest, each beat feeling louder than the last. As I turned my head, I could just barely make out the shape of something hunched over at the edge of my bed. It was barely visible, like a dark, shadowy figure, but I could tell it was there. There was no detail, no clear outline, just a shifting shape in the moonlight, almost like the shadows themselves were taking form. It wasn't like a person. It was wrong. The way the shadow moved, it didn't feel like a human presence. It was like a distortion, something out of place. The moonlight seemed to shimmer around it, casting weird, unnatural glimmers, almost like how you might imagine the predator's invisibility cloak would look, but with shadows instead of light. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, forming and shifting in a way that made my stomach churn. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. My body was frozen in place, every muscle stiff with fear. I could feel the hairs on my neck and arms standing on end, a cold chill running down my spine. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing added up. I wanted to scream or run, but my body wouldn't listen. All I could do was lie there, staring at the figure at the foot of my bed, too terrified to move. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Time felt like it stopped. I couldn't tell if it was seconds or minutes, but it felt like hours, like the shadow was just waiting, watching me. I knew I couldn't keep my eyes on it forever. I had to do something, had to act, but the idea of moving, of doing anything, was terrifying. I didn't want to provoke whatever it was. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel it pounding in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I made myself look away. My eyes darted back to the side, and I tried to calm my breathing. I had to pretend like everything was fine. I didn't want to acknowledge what I'd seen, didn't want to let it know that I was still awake. My whole body was trembling now, but I forced myself to lay back down, pulling the covers up to my chin. I didn't even want to look at the shadow anymore. I kept my face buried in the sheets, hoping that if I couldn't see it, maybe it wouldn't be real. But even with my face covered, I could still feel it. The presence, the weight of whatever was at the foot of my bed, pressing down on the air around me. It was like it was right there, inches away from me, watching, waiting. My eyes were closed, but I couldn't escape the feeling. It was suffocating. I wanted to scream, wanted to yell for my dad, but I couldn't. I couldn't make a sound. The tears started to fall then, hot against my cheeks. I was terrified. I don't know if it was the fear of the unknown or the feeling of being completely helpless, but I couldn't stop crying. My body was on high alert, every nerve screaming at me to run, to do something, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I kept the covers pulled tight over my face, silently begging for it to leave, for the night to be over. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the weight lifted. The bed stopped creaking, the oppressive feeling started to fade, and the air seemed to clear. My heart was still racing, but the sense of being watched, of being trapped, started to ease. I didn't move. I didn't dare. I just laid there, holding my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. The silence in the room felt almost too quiet, like the house was holding its breath too. I didn't hear the figure leave. I didn't hear anything except for my own ragged breathing. But eventually, after what felt like another eternity, I slowly began to realize that whatever it was gone. The weight had fully lifted off the bed, and the room was still again. The shadow, the figure, whatever it had been, had disappeared. But I couldn't bring myself to look. I didn't want to know if it was still there, if it was waiting for me to make a move. I stayed as still as I could, too afraid to do anything but listen. That's when I heard it. The sound came from my closet. The hangers rattled, the metal clinking against each other, like someone had just brushed past them. I felt a jolt of terror shoot through me. I ripped the covers off, my heart pounding in my throat, and I turned toward the closet. I didn't even care that I was panicking. I had to know what was happening. The closet door was closed, but the clothes hanging inside were moving. I could see them shifting, the shadows on the fabric swaying. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there, not like this. I had to check. I had to know if whatever it was still around. I jumped out of bed, my legs shaky as I rushed toward the closet. When I opened the door, everything looked normal. The clothes were hanging just as they had been before, and there was nothing out of place. But on the floor, scattered around the base of the closet, were a few items of clothing that had been neatly hung earlier. They were now on the floor, like they had been pulled out or knocked down. But there was no sign of what had caused it. No shadow, no figure, nothing. I stood there for a long moment, my mind racing, trying to make sense of everything. But there was nothing. It was just an empty closet. I didn't know if I was relieved or more terrified, but at least the feeling of being watched was gone. The weight, the oppressive presence, it was all gone. Whatever had been in my room, whatever had sat at the foot of my bed, was no longer there. I didn't sleep much that night. I don't think I slept at all. The whole time, I kept waiting for something else to happen, for the shadow to come back. But nothing did. I never saw that shadow again, and as time went on, I tried to forget about it. But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in that room with me, something that wasn't supposed to be there, something that was just waiting for the right moment to make itself known. I never told anyone about that night. Not my dad, not anyone. They'd probably think I was crazy, or worse, that I had imagined it all. But I knew what I felt. I knew what I saw. And to this day, I can't explain it. I don't know what it was, but I'll never forget the way it felt to lie there in that bed, completely helpless, while that shadow just waited. It was the middle of the night when I was walking home, the kind of quiet where the world feels like it's holding its breath. I live in a pretty remote area, outside of town, and to get to my place, I have to walk along this long stretch of road. It's about 10 minutes from the edge of town to my house, and the darkness between is something else entirely. There's no streetlights, no houses, just pitch black emptiness stretching out before me. Sometimes it's calming, peaceful even, when I look up and see stars scattered across the sky like pinpricks of light. Other times, though, it's creepy as hell. That night was one of those nights. I had been out with friends, and by the time I was heading back, it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. The town was silent, not a single car in sight, and the usual sounds of the city had long faded. My headphones were broken, so I was stuck walking through the dark, alone, without even the distraction of music. The streetlights were starting to thin out too, leaving only a few houses left as I got closer to the edge of town. I'd done this walk so many times before, I could practically do it with my eyes closed. It's always a weird feeling, walking through this stretch of nothingness. When the lights start to fade and the darkness sets in, it's like walking into a completely different world. A world where you're the only thing that exists. There's something about it that makes every little sound seem louder. A creak from a distant tree, the rustling of leaves underfoot. Every noise feels like it's magnified in the silence. As I approached the last few houses, I glanced up. For some reason, I focused on an old house to my right. It was one of those places that looked like it had been around forever, a little worn down, with a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. The windows were dark, but the one closest to me caught my attention. I don't know why. Maybe it was just the emptiness around me, but I couldn't shake the urge to look. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe I thought someone would be inside, just living life, and I'd catch a glimpse of it through the window. I wasn't thinking of anything in particular, just absent-mindedly looking up. And that's when I saw her. Pressed up against the window, in complete darkness, was a woman. Her face was right against the glass, her features barely visible in the dark. She was standing still, unnaturally still, her arms hanging by her sides. Her expression was blank, no emotion, no warmth, nothing. Just cold, empty eyes staring directly at me. Her face was pale, almost ghostly in the faint light spilling from the street lamps behind me. It looked like she had been watching me for a long time, waiting. I froze. My body tensed up, and for a split second, I couldn't move. The kind of stillness that creeps into your bones when something feels wrong. I stared at her, and she stared back, not blinking, not even shifting slightly. The silence around me was deafening. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. Then, something snapped in me, and I jumped back, my feet stumbling on the uneven sidewalk. I didn't even realize I'd made a noise until it came out. WHOAA. It was a full-blown, instinctual shout. Like my body had just reacted without asking my brain for permission. The air around me seemed to pulse, thick with tension, and all I wanted to do was get the hell away from whatever that was. I turned on my heel and started walking faster, my legs moving without a second thought. As I hurried toward the end of the street, heading into the pitch-black stretch of road, I started to laugh at myself. That wasn't really anything to be afraid of, right? It was just some woman standing in her window, probably in the middle of the night like I was doing whatever. I shook my head, feeling a little embarrassed. I mean, what was I so worked up about? It's not like it was a big deal. But the more I thought about it, the less I could shake the feeling of unease. Why had she been so still? Why was she pressed right up against the window like that, staring at me? And why didn't I see her until I looked up? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she hadn't been there long. Maybe she was just watching something outside the window, and I'd caught her at a weird moment. But the more I thought about it, the more the hairs on the back of my neck started to prickle. I kept walking faster, trying to get to the darkness that lay ahead, hoping that would shake off the tension in my chest. The road ahead was like a wall of nothingness. The complete absence of any light was almost suffocating. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, holding it in front of me to cut through the blackness. The beam of light bounced around, illuminating the uneven patches of asphalt, the occasional tree, the bushes on the side of the road. But even with the light, it felt like the darkness was closing in on me. The kind of dark where you can't see a foot ahead of you, where everything seems like it could be lurking just out of sight. My mind kept going back to the woman. I kept imagining her face pressed up against that window, staring without blinking. The image wouldn't leave me, even as I walked farther into the empty road. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe she hadn't been standing there when I looked up the first time. Maybe she had moved there just as I noticed her, and I hadn't realized until too late. Or maybe she'd been standing there for a long time, watching me, and I just never noticed. As I walked deeper into the stretch of nothingness, the air grew colder. It wasn't a dramatic change, but enough to make me feel uncomfortable. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. My mind kept playing tricks on me, making me think I heard footsteps behind me. But every time I turned around, there was nothing. Nothing but the dark stretch of road, the light from my phone barely cutting through it. I was close to the point where the darkness would be so thick, I couldn't see anything in front of me. I could feel the tension in the air like a rubber band about to snap. But I didn't dare slow down. I had to get home. I had to shake off whatever was crawling up my neck. The quicker I could get home, the better. I finally reached the edge of the dark stretch, where the first few trees lined the side of the road. The street lights had long disappeared, and I was left with nothing but the pale light of my phone. I kept walking, not looking up, just focusing on the path in front of me, hoping that if I didn't think about it, I wouldn't feel the weight of the fear pressing down on me. But every time I passed a dark patch of trees, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following me, or the woman, standing in the dark watching me again. I kept walking, faster now, not caring if it looked ridiculous. My feet pounded against the road as I rushed forward, the phone light bouncing in front of me like a beacon. My breath was coming quicker now, like I was running even though I knew I wasn't. I didn't stop until I finally reached the lights of my house. I couldn't get inside fast enough. My heart was racing in my chest, and my hands were shaking. I locked the door behind me as soon as I got inside, just standing there in the hallway, trying to calm my breathing. It took a long time for the fear to settle. I kept thinking about that woman, standing motionless in the window, and the way her eyes never left me. It wasn't just the creepy feeling that got to me, it was the stillness. The way she didn't move, didn't blink, didn't seem like she was alive at all. I tried to rationalize it, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face pressed against the window. The feeling didn't fade, not completely. I couldn't shake the idea that maybe I wasn't the only one out there in the dark. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't just watching me walk home. I was about 9 or 10 when it happened. The kind of night where the world outside seemed to sleep, but inside my room, I couldn't. I don't know if it was the quiet that kept me awake or just the feeling of something off. I was lying in bed, the covers pulled up to my chin, my head resting on the pillow, staring up at the ceiling. My bed sat right under the window, and I often found myself gazing outside when the night was still, just watching the stars twinkle, or sometimes just the shadows of the trees moving. But on that particular night, I wasn't thinking about the stars. It was late, probably past midnight, the kind of late where everything in the house had settled into silence. The only thing I could hear was the occasional creak of the house shifting in the cool night air. I was looking out the window, staring at the clear sky, the moon casting its soft light over the dark trees in the distance, when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a plane, a light, small but moving fast, darting across the sky. But then it stopped. No, not stopped, it hovered. Right in front of me, almost in line with my window. The light wasn't like any airplane I'd ever seen. It wasn't blinking, like a plane's light would. It wasn't moving like an airplane either. It was just there. I stared at it, squinting to make sense of what I was seeing. The orb was bright white, larger than any star I'd ever seen, and it wasn't stationary for long. It shot across my line of vision with incredible speed, moving in a tight circle before darting off again, faster than I could follow. I blinked. I must have imagined it, right? I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but it was back. It appeared in front of my window again, much closer this time, and much larger. It circled the same way, spinning, moving erratically in tight circles, its glow pulsating softly as it moved. My heart started to race. I couldn't take my eyes off of it, but at the same time, I wanted to look away. The silence in the room made everything feel eerie, like something wasn't right, like I was in the middle of something I wasn't supposed to see. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it shot off into the sky, disappearing so quickly I thought I imagined it. My pulse was hammering in my chest now. The feeling of unease crawled up my spine. What was that? A UFO? But no, that wasn't possible, was it? I tried to convince myself I had just imagined it. I was tired, right? I was probably seeing things. But there was no denying that it was real, whatever it was. I couldn't shake the feeling, so I decided I needed to tell someone. I got up slowly, my feet brushing against the cold wooden floor, and walked out of my room. My mind was racing with thoughts of what I'd seen. I needed to tell my mom, but my mind was still too jumbled to think straight. I walked down the hallway, my bare feet padding softly on the old floorboards. The house felt unnaturally still, like it was holding its breath. As I got to my mom's room, I reached for the doorknob, ready to tell her what had happened, but the door was locked. It wasn't locked like she had accidentally left it that way. It was intentionally locked. I paused. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something didn't feel right. I knocked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mom?" No answer. I stood there for a moment, frozen in the quiet. The house felt too still, like everything had gone into hiding. I looked down the stairs at the darkened living room below. The stairway leading down was steep, casting long shadows in the dim light. I was about to turn around and head back to my room when I heard it. A sound, a faint snorting noise coming from the bottom of the stairs. At first, I thought it was just the house settling or maybe the wind, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was almost like someone, or something, was snorting like an animal. I felt a cold chill run through me. The air in the hallway felt heavier now, the stillness pressing in on me from all sides. I turned to look down the stairs, my heart thumping hard in my chest. And that's when I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, was coming up the stairs. It was moving with a strange, deliberate slowness, its body impossibly long. The snorting noise got louder as it drew nearer. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing made sense. The figure moved like it wasn't even human, its long limbs and narrow body looking unnatural, almost elongated. I opened my mouth to call out, but no words came. My throat went dry. My whole body froze. "Dad," I whispered, though I already knew it wasn't him. It couldn't be. The figure was closer now, its head lifting to meet mine, and that's when I saw its face. It wasn't human. Its skin was pale, almost sickly, stretched tight over its bones. The eyes were the worst part, huge, black, and empty, like two bottomless pits staring straight through me. It had no real nose, just two slits where its nostrils should have been, the skin around them pale and pulled tight. It towered over me as it reached the top of the stairs, leaning forward so its face was inches from mine. The snorting sound came from its nose, a deep, guttural noise like a pig snorting in the dirt. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat. I couldn't move. My body felt like it was made of stone, unable to react, unable to fight or run. I was trapped in that moment, frozen, with the creature standing right in front of me, its eyes never leaving mine. The creature lowered its head, bringing its face right up to mine. I could feel its breath on my skin, cold and strange. It didn't speak, didn't make any other noise besides that horrible snorting. My mind was screaming at me to run, to do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. I collapsed to the floor, my knees buckling underneath me. I fell backwards, my back hitting the wall behind me, but the creature didn't move away. It stayed right there, looming over me, bending down to get even closer. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything felt like it was closing in on me, the dark figure and that awful sound filling my senses. And then I blacked out. I don't know how long I was out. It could have been seconds or hours. All I knew when I woke up was that I was lying on the bottom step of the stairs, my body aching, my head spinning. My mom was kneeling beside me, her face filled with confusion and concern. "Sweetie, how did you get down here?" she asked, her voice soft but unsure. I tried to sit up, my mind racing to piece together what had happened, but it was all a blur. Had I walked down here in my sleep? Sleepwalking, maybe? My mind couldn't make sense of it. "Are you okay?" she asked again, looking down at me, still kneeling next to me at the bottom of the stairs. I opened my mouth to speak, but all I could do was shake my head. The image of that face, those eyes, the snorting sound, it was still fresh in my mind, like it was burned into my brain. I could almost hear the sound again, even now, just thinking about it. But I didn't tell my mom what I saw. I couldn't. She wouldn't believe me, and part of me wasn't even sure what I had seen. Maybe it was just a nightmare, a vivid one. Maybe it was all in my head. But the fear didn't leave. I felt it follow me, lurking just behind me, like that thing was still watching. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I try not to, but the image of that face, the snorting, the cold breath, it haunts me. I wonder if it was real, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I'll never forget the terror I felt in those moments, the feeling that something not human, was right there with me, staring into my soul. And I know, without a doubt, that I'd die of a heart attack if I ever saw it again. I remember it as if it happened yesterday, even though it was so long ago. When I was a kid, my room was tucked away in the spacious downstairs rumpus area, a large, somewhat unfinished part of the house. It wasn't exactly a basement, but it was far enough from the rest of the family's activity that it sometimes felt like I was in a completely different world. I had my own space, which felt like a mark of independence to a young child. But at the same time, it always gave me a sense of unease. It was far from everyone, and the quiet at night was overwhelming. The walls were thin, and I could always hear the creaking of the floorboards above me, the distant hum of the fridge, or the soft murmurs of my parents as they watched TV. But it was all just far enough that it sometimes felt as if I were alone in the house. I would sometimes lay awake listening to the silence, feeling the isolation. But I remember the routine I had back then. My dad gave me his old hi-fi player, one of those big, heavy ones with the spinning CD compartment, the glowing amber amplifier lights, and the oversized speakers. It was a treat, really, getting to use it every night before bed. He'd put on music to help me drift off to sleep. Pink Floyd, The Stranglers, sometimes even Fleetwood Mac. I loved it. Music filled the room and calmed my restless thoughts. It was something familiar, something I could hold on to in the dark, and it was a comfort. The music filled the air, making the space less vast, less lonely. But one night, something changed. I woke up, not fully conscious, but aware enough to realize that the music had stopped. It wasn't the usual fading out of the last track. No, this was different. The silence was more complete. It was as if the room had swallowed up the music entirely. But the amplifier's lights were still on, bright and flickering in an almost unnatural way. I lay there for a moment, blinking at the soft, erratic glow of the amplifier, feeling groggy, half in a dream, unsure if I was still asleep or if I had truly woken up. But the feeling was strange. Something wasn't right. I stumbled out of bed. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. The cold floor beneath my bare feet made me shiver slightly as I dragged myself toward the hi-fi. In my half-dazed state, the shadows of the room seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting and moving at the edge of my vision. The lights from the amplifier flickered again, and the air in the room seemed to grow thicker. It felt like the air had become dense, as though I were breathing through something thick and heavy. When I reached the player, I tried to press the button to turn the music off, but my hand felt almost detached, like I was controlling it from a distance. The usual warmth of the device felt foreign now, colder than it should have been. My fingers brushed against the buttons, but instead of the smooth press I was used to, it felt like I was encountering resistance, like the buttons were pushing back. I finally managed to turn it off, but that was when the feeling hit me. A static sensation, unlike anything I had ever experienced before, washed over my body. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, like a million tiny needles prickling my skin at once, but without the sharpness. It spread from my fingers up to my arms, through my chest, all the way down to my toes. Every hair on my body stood up. Every nerve in my body seemed to fire at once, and my skin tingled like it had never done before. It wasn't just a feeling on the surface. It was like something was pulsing through me, vibrating within my own skin, a sensation of static energy coursing through my body. I tried to step back, to shake it off, but the feeling held me there, rooted to the spot. I couldn't move, couldn't think clearly. I tried to pull myself away, but it was like my body was stuck in a vice. My muscles felt weak and uncooperative, and my limbs were so heavy, they felt as though they belonged to someone else. I felt an overwhelming sensation of being out of control, like the very air around me was thick with something I couldn't understand. The static feeling seeped deeper into my body, taking hold of me, and I felt as though my own body were being used as some sort of antenna. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was almost as if the entire room itself was pulsing with this energy. I tried to push through it, to move, but it was like trying to swim through thick tar. It wasn't painful, but it was suffocating. And then, as the sensation started to subside, something else became apparent. It wasn't just the static feeling or the coldness of the room. There was something else now, a presence, a dark, intangible weight that settled over the room. It wasn't something I could see, but it was something I could feel, like a shadow pressing down on me from every corner. It wasn't a tangible thing, but it was undeniable. I couldn't describe it in any other way but this. It felt malevolent, but not in a way that made me feel immediately terrified. More in a way that made me feel like something was wrong, like something was watching me, waiting for me to react. I knew somehow that the presence was aware of me, of my every breath, of every movement. I could almost hear the weight of its gaze pressing down on me, but it wasn't a voice. It wasn't a sound. It was more like an emotion, a dark presence that hung in the air, filling the room with a sense of dread. But even then, I didn't feel outright fear. I didn't feel the urge to scream or to run. No, the most overpowering feeling was confusion. Why was it there? What did it want? And why, of all things, was it here with me in my room? It wasn't like any nightmare I had experienced before. It wasn't the kind of dream that made my heart race or left me gasping for air. It wasn't the kind of thing that made me want to wake up. It was just there, and it seemed to control everything, from the music that had stopped without my intervention to the way my body was responding. It was a kind of presence that felt like it had power over me in ways I couldn't understand. I remember trying to find some way to cope with it, to manage the sense of suffocation in the room. My brain was struggling to make sense of what was happening. In the panic that began to rise within me, I decided on a course of action, something that seemed to be the only rational thing to do. I decided to play dead. It sounds strange, but in that moment, it felt like the only option. I thought that if I didn't respond, if I didn't show any signs of life, maybe it would leave me alone. Maybe this presence wouldn't want anything to do with a motionless body. So I lay there in bed, perfectly still. Not even a twitch. I didn't breathe too loudly, didn't move an inch. I did my best to mimic the sensation of being inanimate, of being nothing more than a shape under the covers. I held my breath, focused on the stillness, focused on doing nothing at all. My whole body felt frozen, as if I were locked in place, and I waited. Time felt strange. It felt like I had been there for hours, but it could have been mere minutes. My heart hammered in my chest, but I refused to let it show. I had to stay still. I had to convince whatever it was that I wasn't a threat. I was nothing. Finally, just as suddenly as it had come, the feeling started to dissipate. The static sensation faded, and the presence, the oppressive weight in the room, lifted. The air felt lighter again. The amplifier flickered once more, then went out completely, as if nothing had ever happened. I remained perfectly still under the covers, but I felt a sense of quiet relief wash over me. The feeling was gone. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but it was over now. The music didn't start again, but I didn't care. I pulled the covers closer around me, my body still tingling, and I slowly drifted back to sleep, almost forgetting that the whole thing had ever occurred. And the strange thing is, it happened again. Night after night, almost the exact same scenario played out. I would fall asleep, the music playing softly in the background, and then wake up to that same feeling, static, oppressive, and confusing. The presence would return, and I would play dead again, staying still until it disappeared. It became a routine of sorts. I didn't fear it. I didn't understand it, but I learned to endure it, to let it wash over me, and then let it pass. It never hurt me. It never tried to physically harm me. But it was there, every night, controlling the space in ways I couldn't explain. Eventually, I grew older, and the dream stopped. The hi-fi player was put away, and the downstairs rumpus area was no longer my room. But I never forgot those nights, the feeling of static coursing through me, the strange presence, and the eerie calm of playing dead. To this day, I still can't explain it. But one thing is clear. I was never truly alone in that room. Something was always there, watching, waiting, controlling the air around me. And whatever it was, it never seemed to want anything but my quiet submission. I was maybe 10 years old when it happened, just a kid, full of that boundless energy and curiosity, always exploring, never really thinking about what could go wrong. Me and my best friend had been walking along the old dirt road that ran parallel to the river for what felt like hours, the day warm and quiet, the kind of stillness you get in late spring when everything seems a little too peaceful. We'd been down by the river plenty of times before, throwing rocks, splashing around, exploring the banks. It was shallow, just up to our knees most of the time, with a few deeper parts here and there, but nothing to make us think twice. That afternoon, though, we noticed something odd. There was a canoe flipped over near the edge of the water, half sunk and tangled with branches. It wasn't unusual to see old boats left by the river's edge. Sometimes people abandoned them after they broke, or were too worn out to use anymore. But this one was different. The way it was tipped over, like it had been cast aside carelessly, seemed out of place. I don't know what exactly made me want to go investigate it. Maybe it was just the thrill of finding something unexpected in the quiet woods, or maybe it was the thought of getting it right side up and seeing if there was anything interesting inside. My friend, who was usually more cautious than me, was already stepping toward it, glancing at me like he was ready to follow. We didn't think twice. I waded into the river, my sneakers squishing in the mud, and I reached for the canoe, pushing at it with my hands to get it back up. The moment I put all my weight into it, the ground beneath my feet shifted. I had stepped too close to the edge. At first, I thought I was just sinking a little bit into the soft riverbed, which was common in the shallow parts. But then, in a split second, it was like the earth disappeared entirely. My legs were pulled out from under me as the river swallowed me whole. There was no warning, no gradual sinking, just a sudden, violent tug, and I was sucked into the water. I felt myself tumbling, completely disoriented, like I was being thrown around in a washing machine. Water filled my mouth, my lungs. Everything was dark and churning. I couldn't tell which way was up, which way was down. It was like the river had become a force of nature itself, pulling me through some kind of unseen hole in the earth. My body was tossed around, flipping head over heels, arms and legs thrashing wildly, desperate for anything to hold on to. My heart was pounding, and I could barely breathe as the water dragged me deeper, spinning me like a rag doll. I must have been underwater for a few seconds, maybe longer. It felt like an eternity. My chest burned for air. Just when I thought I couldn't hold my breath any longer, the current spit me back up to the surface, throwing me like a piece of driftwood, and I gasped for air, choking on the water that had filled my lungs. I didn't have time to focus on anything. I was back under almost immediately, the current pulling me down again, this time harder, faster, more relentless. I was being sucked into the river, helpless. The world was a blur, just the rushing water and my own panic as I fought to break free. I wasn't even sure where I was, only that I couldn't get a solid footing, couldn't find anything to grab onto. It was like I was caught in a never-ending whirlpool, the undertow dragging me back under every time I resurfaced. My head slammed into something, maybe a rock, maybe another part of the canoe, but I didn't have time to register it because the current took me again, spinning me out of control. I couldn't stop it. I was trapped. Through the blur of water and panic, I heard something. It was faint, distant, but I could make it out. My friend, he was screaming my name, calling out to me, but I couldn't see him. I couldn't do anything. I just kept getting pulled under. Every time I came up for air, I could hear him getting closer, but I couldn't hold on long enough to even try to help myself. The water kept dragging me down, and every time I thought it was over, every time I thought I was finally free, it would suck me back into the depths again. Finally, I saw him. My friend was running along the riverbank, shouting my name, his voice breaking through the rush of water. I couldn't see him clearly. Everything was just a haze, a blur of water and frantic movement, but I knew he was there. And then, out of nowhere, I saw a branch stretched out toward me. It was just within reach, a solid object I could hold on to. Without thinking, I grabbed for it with both hands. For a second, I thought I had escaped. The current was still trying to pull me, but the branch held firm. My friend was pulling, his face twisted in desperation, and somehow I was able to get a good enough grip to get my feet under me. Slowly, painfully, he dragged me toward the bank, inch by inch, the branch scraping against rocks and debris in the water. When I finally felt my feet hit the bottom, I pushed myself up with everything I had left, the branch still gripped tightly in my hand. My friend helped pull me out of the water, and I stumbled onto the shore, gasping for air, my body shaking with exhaustion. We didn't speak for a while. We were both too shaken, too overwhelmed by what had just happened. I couldn't stop shaking, my limbs weak, and my chest still heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The water was still rushing by, calm now, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew what had almost happened. Neither of us made any attempt to get the canoe back up. We didn't even look at it again. We just stood there, side by side, too afraid to speak, too afraid to move. My friend finally grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the water's edge. We didn't go back for hours, didn't tell anyone what had happened, didn't want to risk getting in trouble for playing too close to the river. We didn't talk about it again that day, or the next. But something about that experience stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. It felt like I had narrowly escaped something that could have taken me under and never let me out. Then, a few days later, we heard the news. An elderly couple had been canoeing just upstream, not far from where we had been. Their canoe had tipped over, and the undertow had sucked them under just like it had almost done to me. They hadn't been so lucky. They drowned, their bodies found a couple of days later, carried downstream by the same river I had almost been taken by. They had been caught in the exact same current, the same whirlpool of water, and had no way of escaping. I had almost died in that same river, in the same spot where they had lost their lives. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been just inches away from the same fate they suffered, caught in the same deadly current that had taken them. That feeling of relief when I finally grabbed the branch, when I finally got to safety, it didn't feel like relief anymore. It felt like the river had given me a second chance, one I didn't deserve. We didn't tell anyone about what happened that day. I don't know why. Maybe because we were too afraid, too shaken to speak the words aloud. Maybe because we didn't want to explain how close we had come to losing everything. But that day, that experience, changed something in me. It made me realize how quickly things could go wrong, how quickly the world could turn on you, how fragile life was. The river, it wasn't something to be taken lightly. Not anymore. I never went back to that spot again, and I never looked at a canoe the same way. The memory of that day, the feeling of being dragged under, the panic, the cold water filling my lungs, the fear that I wouldn't make it out, that stayed with me. And it always would. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a small complex. The kind of place that was cheap enough for me to afford, but not exactly charming. The apartment was just big enough for one person, and there was a little walk-in closet connected to the bedroom. The closet wasn't much, just enough space for a few clothes, a shelf for bags, and a small mirror on the inside of the door. It didn't look like much, but it was mine, and I had no complaints. It was also one of those places that was perfect for a couple of years of quiet living before things got complicated. At the time, I was living with my now ex-boyfriend. We'd been together for a while, and things were fine between us, though there was always a little tension. It was nothing I thought too much about, but the longer we lived together, the more I started to notice strange things happening around the apartment. Nothing too big at first, just little noises at night, odd sounds that I couldn't explain. It was always during the late hours, when everything else was still. One night, I woke up to the sound of something heavy shifting from the closet. It was loud enough to break through the silence of the apartment, and it instantly set my heart racing. I could feel my body break out into a cold sweat. My eyes snapped open, but I didn't dare move. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, too scared to even breathe. The closet door was just a few feet away, and the sounds continued, a shifting noise, followed by what sounded like something falling. My mind raced through all sorts of ideas. Maybe something had just fallen off the shelf. But then why had it sounded like someone was moving around in there? I didn't move. I didn't want to know. I stayed perfectly still, pressing my eyes closed tighter, hoping whatever it was would go away. The sound continued for what felt like forever. It was as if something, or someone was inside moving around. But all I could do was lie there, frozen, listening. I didn't know what was going on, but I couldn't bring myself to look. I was terrified. I thought about getting up, checking, but every time I moved, my heart seemed to beat louder, and my skin felt colder. Eventually, the noises stopped. Everything went silent again. I stayed in my bed, barely able to breathe, feeling the adrenaline still rushing through me. I kept my eyes closed, wishing I could fall asleep, wishing it was all just a bad dream. But the fear kept me awake. I thought I had imagined it, or maybe I was just too tired. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Somehow, I managed to drift back to sleep, though I don't know how. When the morning came, I couldn't get up fast enough. I went straight to the closet, wanting to see if anything had fallen, to make sense of the sound from last night. As I opened the door, I saw it. One of the bags I had on the shelf had indeed fallen to the floor. There was no other sign of anything unusual, no evidence that anyone had been in there, no broken things or signs of disturbance. It was just the bag. I let out a relieved breath. Maybe it had been nothing after all. It didn't make sense, but I decided to brush it off. I got ready for work, just like any other morning. As I walked past my ex, he casually said something that stopped me dead in my tracks. I had a bad dream last night. I glanced over at him. What was it about? The closet, he said, looking at me like it was no big deal. I felt my heart skip a beat. I didn't say anything at first, thinking it might be nothing. But then I asked, what about the closet? He paused for a moment, looking at me seriously. I saw you in there, walking backwards. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to react. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told him anything about the noise, not a word. I wasn't sure what to think, but my stomach twisted into knots. I'd never sleepwalked before, never had any history of doing anything like that. But hearing him say that made everything feel so much worse. He shrugged it off as just a dream, but the unease lingered. I didn't feel like I could shake it, even as I went about my day. I didn't know what to make of it. There was no rational explanation for what had happened, no way to explain why he had seen me walking in the closet. He wasn't the kind of person to lie, and I knew I hadn't been awake to do it. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, or that he was just dreaming. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. A couple of years passed, and life moved on. I eventually moved out of that apartment, and things between my ex and me came to an end. I didn't think much about the closet incident after that. I thought it was just one of those weird things you don't understand and move on from. But the memories of that strange night lingered in the back of my mind, even though I tried to push them away. Not long after, I moved into another apartment in the same complex, but this time with my current boyfriend. It was a different unit, a different space. It wasn't as cozy, but it felt like a fresh start. I told myself I could leave all that weird stuff behind. Then one night, just like before, something happened that I couldn't explain. I woke up in the middle of the night, unsure of what had disturbed my sleep. For a moment, everything felt too quiet, like the air had thickened, and I felt an odd sense of unease creeping in. I looked over at my boyfriend, and he was still asleep, his body relaxed, the soft rhythm of his breathing steady. Then he stirred, and his voice cut through the silence. So, I woke up and saw you standing in the closet last night. My blood ran cold. I froze. I didn't know what to say. The words were stuck in my throat. My mind instantly went back to the night in my old apartment, when my ex had told me something almost identical. I hadn't told my current boyfriend anything about what happened in the past. I hadn't even mentioned the whole walking in the closet thing. So how could he know? The realization hit me hard. He had seen something too, something that shouldn't have been possible. I was awake, and I didn't walk in my sleep. I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he said. I never sleepwalk, I finally managed to say. I didn't even get out of bed last night. Are you sure you saw me? He was quiet for a moment before shrugging. Yeah, I'm sure. I saw you standing there. It was freaky. I thought maybe I was dreaming at first, but it felt real. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, but the truth was that something was going on, something that didn't make sense. I wasn't imagining things, and neither was he. But the bigger question was, why did this keep happening? I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I couldn't ignore it. It was too strange, too real. I lay in bed, my thoughts racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Could it be that the apartment had some strange energy? Could it be something to do with me? Something I wasn't aware of? I didn't have answers, but the coincidences were too unsettling to dismiss. After that night, things didn't get any clearer. The moments of unease didn't stop, but I couldn't make sense of them. I didn't want to believe that there was something supernatural at play, but there were too many unexplained occurrences to ignore. It was like something had been planted in my mind that I couldn't forget. Maybe it was all in my head, but the memories felt real. The fear felt real. I didn't know if it was some strange psychological phenomenon, some unexplained glitch, or just a result of stress and anxiety from the past. But I couldn't shake it. I moved out of that apartment a few months later. The decision was mine. I didn't want to feel haunted by something I couldn't understand. I wanted a fresh start, and I got it. But the closet, the strange occurrences, they never quite left me. They were a part of me now, lodged in the back of my mind, a memory that I couldn't quite forget, no matter how hard I tried. I don't know what happened in that closet. I don't know why it happened again in the new apartment. I don't have any answers, and maybe I never will. But sometimes, when I think back to those nights, I can still feel the same cold sweat, the same fear that I felt all those years ago. And I'll never fully understand why I couldn't escape it. When I was 12, everything in my life felt heavy. That's the best way I can describe it. Not like being tired from a long day, but more like walking around with weights strapped to your chest and legs all the time. I didn't know the word for what I was feeling back then, or maybe I did and just didn't want to accept it. Depression is a big word for a 12-year-old, and even though adults sometimes say, kids can't be depressed, I knew something was wrong with me. It wasn't just sadness, it was something deeper, like a gray filter over my life that wouldn't lift. My mom and I lived in a 3-story apartment building in a quiet part of the city. Our unit was on the top floor, but our own apartment had 3 levels inside. The bottom level was the kitchen and living room. Then there was a middle floor with my mom's room and another bathroom, and the top floor was mine. I had my bedroom, a tiny hallway with a small window, and a bathroom with slanted ceilings. It was nice in a way, having the top all to myself, but it also made me feel very alone. I don't mean that in a poetic or dramatic way. I mean literally alone. Isolated. Out of reach. The small things started happening slowly. At first, my mom asked me where I had put certain things. A letter she left on the coffee table was gone. A small pouch of coins she kept in the drawer for laundry disappeared. Pens, keys, little household items. None of them turned up, no matter how many times we tore the place apart. At first she blamed me, and I don't blame her. I was a moody kid, always spacing out, and not very good at keeping things in their place. But when things of mine started going missing, like my phone charger, a hoodie I left on the couch, even a notebook I wrote in every day, she started to realize it wasn't just me being careless. Around the same time, the television in the living room started turning itself on and off. Not often, and not in any dramatic way. It would just click on in the middle of the night, or turn off while we were watching something. We chalked it up to a faulty power strip or some wiring problem. Neither of us thought much about it. There was no reason to. Nothing felt threatening or strange yet. Just little quirks of the apartment, we thought. But when I turned 13, things started to feel different. I remember one night very clearly. I had been crying in my bed. It wasn't a loud, dramatic sobbing, just that quiet kind of crying that sneaks up on you when you're lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I was in pain, not physical pain, but that deep, crawling ache that sits somewhere behind your ribs and fills your chest. I don't even remember why I was crying. Maybe it was school, or maybe just one of those nights where the sadness came and refused to leave. And then, something touched my face. It felt like the way someone would gently touch a crying baby's cheek. Light, careful, soft. I didn't jump or scream. I should have. But instead, I felt comforted. Like someone was trying to say, "It's okay, I'm here." I fell asleep not long after. And when I woke up, it felt like a dream. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. More things started happening. One afternoon, I had a friend over. We were standing in the little hallway on the top floor, near my room. The whole house was quiet, and then suddenly we both heard loud, fast footsteps running up and down the stairs. Heavy steps, like an adult running fast. We both froze. My friend looked at me with wide eyes and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I could see her face go pale. The steps kept going for maybe 5 or 10 seconds, and then everything was quiet again. We ran downstairs to check, but nobody was there. The front door was locked. My mom wasn't home. There was no one in the building's stairwell either. It was just us. After that, I started noticing things more often. One day I was home alone, sitting in my room with the door open. I heard the key turning in the lock downstairs. I even heard the door open, the creak of it swinging, and then footsteps on the wooden floor. I called out to my mom, thinking she had come home early. No answer. I waited, expecting her to come up the stairs and say hello. But nobody did. I walked down and checked the door. Still locked. Still chained from the inside. Things moved when I wasn't looking. I'd place my glass of water on my desk and return from the bathroom to find it on the windowsill. My notebooks, my pencils, even my alarm clock. I'd find them in odd places I was sure I hadn't left them. But none of this felt dangerous. It was strange, sure, but not scary in the way horror movies are. It was just off. And after a while, I stopped reacting. It became normal to feel like I was being watched. Sometimes, when I brushed my teeth at night, I'd see shadows moving in the mirror behind me. Sometimes I'd feel a shift in the air, like someone had just walked past me. But I got used to it. My mom told me once, very casually, that she sometimes saw things move in the corner of her eye. That she would be in the kitchen and feel like someone was standing just outside the doorway. But when she looked, no one was there. We talked about it like it was the weather. Oh, the lights flickered again today. Or my book was on the floor when I got home. We didn't think of it as a haunting. We didn't label it. It was just a part of our lives. But then things got worse. I was 14 or 15 when my depression reached a kind of peak. I stopped wanting to go to school. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep, or I slept too much. I started cutting, just to feel something. There's no nice way to put that. I was hurting and didn't know how to say it out loud. I tried to end my life twice. Both times I stopped myself, but the thoughts didn't go away. They hung around like fog. During this time, My mom said she once saw a white fog climbing the stairs to my floor. Not mist, like from a kettle or steam from the shower. A solid, moving fog that went up the steps and disappeared near my room. She never told me this in a dramatic way, just brought it up in passing, almost like she didn't want to believe it herself. But she remembered it, and I could see in her eyes that it scared her. The worst night came a few months after that. I couldn't sleep, which wasn't unusual by then. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. My desk was across from my bed, with a small couch next to it. As I lay there, I heard something. Breathing. Heavy, slow, rough breathing. Like someone asleep, or maybe sick. It came from the couch. Not the room. Not the hallway. The couch. I didn't move at first. I thought maybe I was imagining it, or that my own breathing was echoing somehow. But it didn't stop, and it didn't match my rhythm. It was louder, rougher. I stared into the dark and could barely make out the shape of the couch, but I knew there was no one there. Still, the breathing kept going. It wasn't animal-like. It was human, but not calm. Not normal. It had this edge to it, like whoever it belonged to was angry or in pain. I lay there for over an hour, frozen, listening to it. My chest felt tight, my fingers were cold, and I couldn't bring myself to move. Eventually, I worked up the courage to get out of bed. The moment I stepped toward the hallway, the breathing faded. But as I reached the hallway, it suddenly became loud again, louder than before, as if it was following me. I ran downstairs. I didn't even think. I just ran into my mom's room. She let me sleep there that night. She didn't question it. I think she knew. She said later she heard it too when she went up to check, though neither of us ever found anything. I heard that breathing a few more times in the weeks after. Once during the day, once while I was brushing my teeth. It was never consistent, never predictable, but always the same, always close. Then there were the lights. Every day I saw flashes. Not like a light bulb flickering, but more like camera flashes outside the window. White, quick bursts of light. They didn't come from a specific direction. They weren't reflections or passing cars. Our building faced a quiet courtyard, and the street wasn't busy. I didn't have migraines. I didn't feel sick. But I saw them all the time, morning, evening, midnight. They would pulse once, maybe twice, and then disappear. This went on for about 2 years, and then as slowly as it started, it stopped. When I was 16, I began therapy. I didn't want to go at first, but my mom insisted. I was angry, embarrassed, tired, but after a few sessions, something started to shift. I didn't talk about the breathing or the lights. I talked about school, my self-harm, the darkness I felt all the time. And little by little, I felt lighter. Not healed, not fixed, but lighter. I started to sleep again. I picked up some hobbies. I left my room more often. And as my mood improved, the strange things stopped. No more breathing. No more fog. No more moving objects or footsteps or flashing lights. Nothing. Just silence. I realized one day, maybe around 17, that I hadn't felt watched in a long time. The apartment felt like a normal home again. Quiet, sometimes boring, but normal. I moved out when I was 20. I'm 25 now. I haven't experienced anything strange since. No breathing, no lights, no moving objects. Sometimes I visit my mom, and her place still feels peaceful. She hasn't mentioned anything strange in years. I don't know what happened. I don't know how to explain it. But I believe, in a strange way, that what I was going through, my depression, my pain, somehow created an atmosphere. Not a ghost, not a demon, but something real. Something born from my state of mind. Like my pain filled the air and made it heavy, and the heaviness took on a shape. It sounds crazy, I know, but I lived it. And when I started to feel better, whatever it was went away. I don't think it ever wanted to hurt me. It just reflected me. It was like my sadness had a sound, a breath, a presence. And when the sadness faded, so did the I grew up in a one-room schoolhouse that had been turned into a house long before I was born. It sat alone on a sloping hillside in the middle of farmland that stretched out to the tree line and then kept going past what I could see. My great-aunt's husband's family had owned that whole hill a long time ago, back when it was all part of one huge farm. They were old-school farmers, and when they needed to store grain, they built a simple wooden structure for it. Eventually, someone had the idea to use the building for a school, since it was solid and central. Over time, The property lines got chopped up, the farmland sold off in pieces, and the school shut down. Then it just became a house. My house. It wasn't much, just a single big room when it started. Over the years, people had added to it, kind of awkwardly. My bedroom was part of an old lean-to that had been insulated with newspaper and patched up with sheets of drywall and painted wood. The floor creaked everywhere you walked, and in winter the wind found its way inside no matter what we did. But there was something about the place I loved, even with all the bad memories. I always thought it held on to things, like it never forgot what it used to be. And I never forgot that either. You could see it on maps dating all the way back to 1844. I found that out doing a school project when I was 15. I tried digging deeper, hoping I could trace it back to the first time someone wrote about it, but 1844 was as far as I ever got. Still, it meant the place had been standing for well over 150 years. That thought got stuck in my head. All the kids who must have walked through the front door, all the teachers who stood at the blackboard, all the winters, all the storms, and all the stories it must have held inside. There was one story everyone seemed to know around here, but they all told it like it was some kind of campfire tale, something local kids passed around at sleepovers or whispered about in the woods. Supposedly, back when it was still a school, there was a boy just 12 years old who tried to sneak in one night. Maybe it was a dare or just a dumb idea, but he pried open one of the windows and tried to crawl through. Only the old wooden sash came down on his neck. It broke instantly. That's how the story went. No one knew his name, just that he was a student and that he died right there at the window, half in and half out. When I was little, that story scared the hell out of me. Later, it just got pushed to the back of my mind, like a bad dream you remember in pieces. But it came back when I was 17. It was on my birthday. I didn't have a lot of friends, but I'd made a few close ones. That year, 5 or 6 girls came over to celebrate. It was the most people we'd had in the house since maybe Christmas the year before. I remember it was cold outside, even though it was early April. We had pizza and soda, we played loud music off a Bluetooth speaker that kept cutting out, and we talked about boys and teachers and stuff that felt important then. At some point, someone, maybe Jamie, pulled out a Ouija board. It was one of those old ones made of wood, not the cheap plastic kind you get at Walmart. She said her older sister had used it at college, and it definitely worked. I didn't think much of it. I figured we'd try it for a few minutes, laugh, and get bored. We set it on the living room floor and lit a few candles for atmosphere, like idiots. Then we all sat in a circle and touched the planchette with 2 fingers each. It didn't move at first. We were all giggling, accusing each other of pushing it. But then it did move, and it didn't stop. It spelled things out fast, faster than we could write down. Jamie grabbed a notebook and tried to keep track, but the planchette kept sliding across the board, smooth as glass. The words didn't come all in one sentence. They were broken up, like flashes of thought. The more we read back what had been written, the more it seemed like a story. About a boy. He was 12 years old. He liked to draw. He was alone. He said he had watched out for me. That's what stopped everything cold. The board spelled it out slowly, and then repeated it. He said he had always watched out for me because my smile reminded him of his sister's. Her name, he said, was Gertie. I didn't have a poker face. Everyone saw me freeze. I asked them to repeat it. They read it back again. The board moved again and said, library. Open window. Now I should say that the library in our house wasn't some big fancy room. It was just a walk-in closet off the living room where we kept too many books. Stacks on shelves, stacks on the floor, even a few in milk crates. My mom used to read a lot before she started drinking. I had always liked the library, even though it smelled like dust and old paper, and the bare bulb flickered when you pulled the cord. When the board said open window, I laughed. I thought maybe someone was trying to mess with me, but I still got up and walked toward the library. I opened the door. I didn't even make it all the way in. Something hit me the second I crossed the threshold. I don't know what it was. Just a feeling, like the air was thicker, colder, like it was pushing against me. My stomach turned over, and my arms broke out in goosebumps. I felt like something was about to happen, something I didn't want to be around for. I backed out and shut the door, then walked back into the living room like nothing happened. The girls kept asking me what was in there. I told them nothing. We moved on to other stuff. The board got packed away. Eventually, everyone went to bed or crashed on the floor in sleeping bags. But I didn't sleep much that night. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started doing research. I already knew the building dated back to at least 1844, but I went deeper. I found old land records and school rosters. It took weeks, but I finally found a name, Edward L. something. I forget the last name now. It was long in German. Born in 1876, died in 1888. It said he died in an accidental trauma. He was 12. His sister's name was Gertrude. That part stuck with me the most. Gertrude. It was such an old name, but you didn't hear it much anymore. The fact that the board had said it, I didn't know what to do with that. For a while, I tried not to think about it. Life kept moving, even if it moved in ways I didn't like. My mom drank too much, and she was angry all the time. She was never really around, and when she was usually yelling. When she wasn't yelling, she was asleep on the couch. Her boyfriend, he lived with us for 7 years. He was worse. He had this creepy smile that never reached his eyes. I hated him from the minute he moved in. Over time, I had real reasons to. I used to think about what the board said, that the boy watched out for me, that he thought I reminded him of his sister. But if that was true, where the hell was he when I needed someone? I was a kid, alone in a house where no one protected me. I kept grabbing books from that little library closet and muttering under my breath. Sorry I didn't open the window. But also, where were you when it mattered? Sometimes I was mad at myself for even believing there was anything there. Other times, I was mad at the house, or the history, or whatever kept it all stuck inside. Still, I never opened the window. Something about it made my hands shake. I'd walk into the library sometimes and stare at it. The small, square window above the bookshelf that never quite closed right. I kept it locked, though. I kept it shut. Years went by. I moved out when I could. College was hard to afford, but I got out of the house eventually. My mom's boyfriend left, finally, and then she did too, in a way. She was still alive, but she wasn't the same. Her body was there, but her mind had gone dull, like a light dimmed behind her eyes. She passed away not long after. Liver failure. I wasn't surprised. I didn't cry at the funeral. It felt like she'd died years before that anyway. The house sat empty for a while. I thought about selling it, but something kept drawing me back. Eventually, I moved back in, not because I missed it, but because I didn't have anywhere else to go, and I needed a place to stay while I figured things out. It was still drafty and creaky and full of memories, most of them bad, but it was familiar. The library was still there. The same books, the same dust. The window still shut tight. I don't know why I never opened it. I guess part of me still believed it meant something. Like if I opened it, something would change, or something would come in. I didn't know which scared me more, so I just kept saying sorry. Every time I went in there for a book, I'd whisper it under my breath. I'm sorry I didn't open the window. I'm sorry I left you there. I'm sorry I ever believed in ghosts. But maybe the house didn't hold ghosts. Maybe it just held feelings, pain, memory, things that don't die but don't stay alive either. Maybe that boy was just a name on an old roster, and the rest was just a story we told ourselves. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Or maybe we make things up to explain the parts of our lives that don't make sense. A story to cover the gaps. Still, I always felt like someone was watching when I was in the library. Not in a terrifying way. Not anymore. Just quiet, like someone holding their breath. One day, I went in to clean. I was sorting books, dusting shelves. I pulled the cord to turn on the light, and it flickered like always. I opened the closet window, not because I believed, but because it was spring and the air felt good. Fresh. For once, the window didn't stick. It opened easy, like it had been waiting. I left it open the rest of the day. That night, I didn't feel anything strange. No cold air. No creaks. Just quiet. I still live in the house. I've fixed a few things. Painted some walls. The floor still creaks. The library is still full of too many books. The window still opens when I need it to. And every now and then, when I'm in there alone, I pause and listen. I don't hear voices. I don't see shadows. But I feel something like... It was a couple of years ago when my family and I were on vacation in Slovenia, specifically in Bled. We had chosen a hostel close to the lake, known for its picturesque views and proximity to local attractions. The hostel was a cozy place, with a mix of travelers from around the world. Our room was modest but comfortable, with a couple of beds and a couch at the end. On our second night, After a day filled with exploring the town and visiting the medieval Bled Castle perched atop a cliff, we returned to our room exhausted. The castle, with its ancient stone walls and panoramic views of the lake, had an eerie charm that lingered in my mind. That night, the moonlight seeped through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the room. Everyone was asleep, the rhythmic breathing of my family members creating a soothing background noise. I lay awake, my mind replaying the day's events. Suddenly, I heard the wooden floor creak. At first, I thought it was someone turning in their sleep, but the sound was deliberate, like footsteps. My heart began to race. I strained my eyes in the dim light and saw a silhouette of a man entering our room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving slowly and deliberately. He approached the couch where my sister was sleeping. I wanted to scream, to alert my family, but fear paralyzed me. I was drenched in sweat, my body refusing to move. In the moonlight, I caught a glimpse of his face, unshaven, with a cold, expressionless look. Then, he turned his head and looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time stood still. Without a word, he turned and swiftly exited the room, disappearing into the darkness. I lay there, heart pounding, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The next morning, I recounted the incident to my family. They were skeptical, attributing it to a bad dream or an overactive imagination. But I knew what I had seen. The memory of that intruder's face haunted me for days. We continued our vacation, visiting various sites around Bled. The town, with its medieval architecture and serene lake, had a timeless quality. But the incident left a lingering sense of unease. I found myself double-checking locks and being more vigilant, especially at night. Despite the scare, our trip was memorable. Bled's beauty was undeniable, and the experience taught me the importance of staying alert, even in seemingly safe environments. I never found out who that man was or what his intentions were, but the incident served as a stark reminder that danger can lurk even in the most idyllic settings.